Welcome to the live stream on a Friday, an unusual day for us to be doing it. We've been focusing on Wednesdays, but so much going on at the moment. But I hope this is okay for some of you, and I hope the time zone is working. I think it works for Australia. It doesn't work very well for North America, obviously, but for Asia, Australian region, I think it's hopefully all right. So hi to everybody out there, and hope you can have a good weekend as well. So as ever, lots to talk about, I think, post the Miami Grand Prix and everything that happened there. Plus news, of course, that Jack Doohan is having to stand down. I hope it's not permanently, but I mean, you always fear the worst in Formula One with politics. His place for 5 races anyway, taken by Franco Colapinto. No surprise there, we'd all been kind of predicting that from day one when Flavio arrived, and all of a sudden Argentine sponsors starting to appear on the car. So Colapinto will be in the car from Imola onwards, the next round of the championship. So, I mean, that's obviously good for him, good for Argentina. Not good for Jack Doohan because he hasn't had a very good run with Alpine so far. Quite a lot of glitches, the worst of which, of course, was the shunt in FP2 in Japan, massive shunt, which really was a function of not being allowed to drive in FP1. For a rookie not to be able to do FP1 in Suzuka was inexcusable, really, in my view. Just for a renter driver to be in the car for the first session, make a bit of money, it's not right. And we all know there was that DRS issue. And if you want more details on that, I've got a video out at the moment, actually, about where Formula One is going in 2026 with active aero. And there's a lot of talk about the push to pass stuff that's going on for 26, which is basically an electric thing now rather than DRS. But we're also going to have active aero, not to facilitate overtaking, but just to make the cars quicker in a straight line, because the powers that be are concerned that they're not going to be that quick in a straight line compared with this year's cars. And they're very worried about numbers. And when I say numbers, I mean how quick they are. Heaven forbid that we could have a car that's slower in a straight line than the previous year. I mean, does anybody really care about, would anybody be able to notice it if they didn't know what speeds they were doing? Can anybody differentiate when you're watching TV between 334 kilometers an hour and 349 kilometers an hour? Does it really matter that much? Anyway, because obviously it does matter to a lot of people, we're going to active aero, which is basically multiplying the issues of DRS. And we've had some problems with DRS, most recently with Jack Doohan. Obviously that huge shunt with Marcus Ericsson in 2018, Monza, and so forth. And other things, you know, the Lewis Hamilton thing and Brazil 21, all those stupid things. And DRS, you don't need. I mean, the speed differential we saw at the end of the straight in Miami, I think should have been proof enough. And it caught out Carlos Sainz, obviously, on the last lap when he was catching Lewis. I mean, he didn't need DRS at that point. If it had just been a straight toe, that would have been an easy pass. But because it was DRS, he had so much additional speed, he didn't know where to go. And all of a sudden, it was a mess. So anyway, that's my rant on that. But if you want to see more on that, I've got this video out called, Does Formula One Really Need Active Aero? And if you haven't seen it, I would ask you to watch it, because it does, I think it makes a lot of sense. Otherwise, I wouldn't have put the video out. But I do think that we're going in the wrong direction with active aero. I really do. So no more. I've got something else I'm going to talk about a bit later on, but I won't do it all at once. So let's just have a look at some of the questions as we get into it. These are just people that have been queuing up to get into the chat box. So inevitably, here we go. In starting order. Sheriff of Sandovote, hello there. Looks like a nice picture of Alain and Niki Lauda on your photo there. Hi, Peter. Hope you're well. Never quite understood, why did Lauda leave Brabham from one day to the next? Frustrated? ? Yeah, well, you're talking about, 79 Canadian Grand Prix it was, I think, wasn't it? When I think he did the first session or something, and he just walked out of the team. And it was quite cool, actually, how he did that. I mean, that to me, that always suggested there was something going on there between Niki and Bernie, and Niki was not very happy with life at that point. And lo and behold, they got Riccardo Zanino, quite wealthy, not particularly quick, but quite wealthy, nice guy. Argentine was happened to be in Montreal, summoned to the circuit. And I think, if memory serves me correctly, I think he wore Niki's kit in the first session or something, in his first drive. And so he got straight into the car. And yeah, why did he do that? I think he just, I mean, I always felt he just got sort of tired of the whole Bernie thing. I think it was quite a refreshing change after Ferrari And of course, he walked out of Ferrari as well. He's quite good at doing that, Nicky. He just walks out of teams when they least expect it. That was the 77 Canadian Grand Prix, just after first practice, or even before first practice, I think. And he just disappeared, said, no, I'm going to retire, or not, I'm going to drive for Brabham next year. I'm not going to do any more races for Ferrari. He had just won the championship, Drivers' Championship. That as a result, Gilles Villeneuve had his first Grand Prix there. But Nicky was there at the track, at the hotel and everything else, and just suddenly decided not to race. And it was a similar thing also in Canada, actually, this time in Montreal, as distinct from Mosport. And I think at Ferrari, he was just fed up with all the politics, Foggieri, not Foggieri as such. I mean, Foggieri wasn't political in any ways, but I think he was a little bit, in Nicky's mind, things weren't always going the way they should technically, and it wasn't as efficient as it was back in the early mid-70s when he was there, 74, 75, when he was really on top of it. I suppose some of it was Carlos being in the team, annoying him, winning some races, and being as quick as he was. I think he would have been happier if Clay had stayed. Anyway, he was fed up with Ferrari and everything that came with it. And so he went to Bernie, and he really wanted to experience the whole UK, British approach to Formula One, clean, apolitical, straightforward. Gordon Murray. He took Amano Kwogi with him, of course, his great mechanic, who had been at Gulf and Eagle and various places, and great mechanic. Took him from Ferrari to Brabham. Actually, I think he got Alpha to pay for it. He was effectively an Alpha employee, which worked well for Bernie, and of course went to Alpha Engines. And 78, the car was the year of ground effect really coming in for the first time. And of course, the Brabham Alpha with its flat 12 engine was useless in that area. So Nicky was always uphill battle. 79, Alpha did a pretty good job. They produced a V12, a 60-degree V12, I think, to try and get, obviously, to have the narrow engine for the ground effect. And it wasn't a bad car, but it was a heavy car and it drank a lot of fuel. And so it was never really a race-winning car, particularly at a time when Ligier and Williams were now winning everything with their ground effect cars. And Lotus was sort of still there, kind of. And so Nicky, I think, got a bit dispirited with that. And then there was Nelson Piquet arriving, who was obviously really quick. And I think he just looked ahead to 80, 81. And yeah, he knew they were probably going back to Cosworth engines. And he just thought, Piquet with the Cosworth, I'm going to be fighting against that. Bernie's probably more pro Piquet than me. I'm not getting paid as much as I should. And he had these plans and these ideas to go and do his own airline. And that was it, really. That was the clincher. I think it was money driven quite a lot, because he would, no way he would have been earning a lot of money from Bernie, and Bernie just didn't pay drivers a lot of money. Relatively not bad, but not great. But he potentially could do what he wanted to do with a completely self-owned airline, which he did. Started Lauda Air, and it was a big success. And then he came back again, 82. So yeah. I think it was a combination of things, really. Not really a good answer, I suppose, but, what can you say? That was it. Very strange, the whole thing. Another one from Sherry from Sanderboat. What is it like to be an F1 driver manager? What qualities do you need to do the job well, and do you think the role has changed much compared when you were with Nigel? Well, I make it clear, I wasn't actually Nigel's manager as such. He had a guy called Mike Watt for a while, who... his claim to fame was that he'd managed Lester Piggott, the jockey, and Nigel thought that was quite impressive and signed him to a deal. And his big contribution was to get Nigel to sign a letter of agreement with Ferrari, the back end of 86, which of course he then had to pay to get out of in order to stay at Williams for 87 when Honda and Williams made him a much better offer. So that was a bit of a mess. I don't think we saw much of him again. And then after that, Nigel was pretty much his own man, other than the fact that, yes, I was very close to him, and we used to talk a lot on the phone, I don't know, 2 or 3 times a week. And for a long time, I was with him all the time at races. And so what was it like at that time? For me, it was total belief that this guy was going to make it. But because it was so difficult for Nigel to get a decent car and a decent drive and a decent team with decent, well-financed team, that was always the uphill battle. And for a long time, I'll use the word we, didn't know on a Monday morning where Nigel would be racing and if he would be racing. Good example, beginning of the 83 season, after Colin Chapman had passed away in 82, back end of 82, Peter Waugh rang Nigel. I remember Nigel ringing me minutes after the phone call from Peter War. And Peter War had basically said, he was the team manager of Lotus, the new boss, if you like. Nigel, we can't really find anyone to replace you at the moment. We're trying to get Derek Warwick, but it's very difficult. So we'll let you drive the car on a race by race basis, but be ready to stand by, to stand down if we need you to. That was the offer. And that's not good for a driver's motivation, and so you ask what it's like to be a driver manager. My job at that point was obviously to keep Nigel as calm and as positive as possible, which wasn't that difficult because Nigel was very positive always in terms of his own ability and what he was going to achieve. So a lot of it was that. I think ultimately it is about making sure you're with a guy that you believe has the talent to make it to the top, and in my case that's always based on how they drive and how they use the front end of the car and whether they do all the things that we talk about on this channel. And I really felt that about Nigel, and as various other drivers have come across my bows at various stages, and I've always thought, yeah, this guy deserves to make it because he has this talent. I don't think it's changed that much in terms of what you have to do. With Nigel, a lot of my effort was on just trying to get money for him, particularly in the Formula 3 days. So I used to spend a lot of time writing presentations, phone calls, getting to the office 6 a.m, trying to ring people in their time zone at the right moment, following up with letters. It's a bit soul destroying. But if you really believe in something, you just have this passionate thing in front of you and you just get on with it. I think today it's a little bit more liaising between the drivers and the teams. It's a bit like sort of being a political lobbyist more than anything else. I think having to raise the money's not, I think it would be very good, but it's very difficult today to do it around a team that you're trying to aim for, because that team's got its own commercial deals and all the rest of it. And it's a bit of a minefield. I mean, when I did the deal with Nigel with Pace Petroleum, the deal was that if Nigel got into Formula One, we would carry the logo on Nigel's helmet and overalls, and he did. And it was a great deal for Pace. But it was because it was in a time when you could do that sort of thing. And Nigel said to Colin Chapman, when Chapman gave me that first opportunity in Formula One, I've got to have this logo on my helmet. And Colin said, yeah, no problem. Even though the car had Essex on the side, Essex Petroleum. Well, it wasn't so much petroleum, it was oil, futures and stuff. But nonetheless, it was in the same sort of market sector. And there's a different oil company on Nigel's helmet, but he did it. And I always felt good that we put together the right deal there. And I used to do lots of contra deals with the magazines that I worked for, trying to get free advertising space for the sponsors that I was talking to for Nigel and things like that, mixing and matching. Flat out job, got to say. But it's all, you can only do it if you really believe in the driver's talent, technically. And if you don't have that technical feel and knowledge for distinguishing between one driver and another, you shouldn't really be in the business of managing a driver, I think. Sarosh Soman. Hi, Peter. I'm just going to adjust the positioning of these three line questions because it's a bit cramped. That's a bit better. Sarosh Soman. Peter, I was watching a sim lap driven by GP with Max advising him. What stood out for me was how quickly Max had asked GP to upshift when exiting corners. Max didn't want the engine BK braking, slowing him down. Yeah, I think, I don't want to sound as if the old days were the key, but if you talk to any of the great drivers in the days of manual shift, always, I'm talking about the great drivers now, if it's iffy, you'd always go for a longer gear. Out of a corner, into a corner, if it's maybe third on the limiter or fourth, you'd take it in fourth. And that was an example between Carlos Reutemann and Alan Jones through the fast S's in Buenos Aires. Carlos would take them in fourth, Alan was in third. And Alan had a little bit more sort of torque on the engine because of the high revs, but Carlos was in fourth and everything was just beautifully harmonious. And I think what you're seeing there is, there's all this stuff about, engine braking and all that, but I think it's more to do with the feel for the car as well, the harmony and the flow of the car. And it doesn't surprise me at all that Max was asking for, I think what he's saying is he's asking for early upshifts, I think is what we're saying there, right? And I think that's, That's absolutely spot on. That's one area where a sim maybe is quite accurate. So thank you for that. Dillstar22. Hi, Peter. I hope all's well. Yeah, very well. Thank you very much, Dillstar. And now a question from Dillstar. First Aston this year are so slow. Yes, they got points in the sprint, but it's still bad in the races. Yeah, it is terrible, isn't it? I think everybody has to be just projecting through to 2026 now. And I can't imagine right now that Adrian Newey is not at his drawing board sketching the 26 car and probably also sketching factory layouts and organograms of who's going to do what, how they're going to build the car, the structure of, he's probably on top of everything, the personnel, the organization of the new factory there. The whole thing will be an Adrian Newey production, which is pretty scary for everybody else, I think, because it'll be very good for sure. And of course, the Strolls have got the money to pay for all that. So that's what'll be going on. And as a result, eyes off the ball now, trying to get the best they can. Fernando had a pretty good qualifying session, didn't he? But messy racing stuff in the traffic, and it wasn't necessarily his fault, but the cars and Stroll, not doing too badly, but not very good. And so, I don't know. It's difficult to imagine how they can be so slow, I have to say. When you see the racing bulls going as well as they are, why aren't Aston at least as good as that? Why isn't Alonso at least out qualifying Isaac Hadjar? But he's not even doing that. It doesn't even look like it. It's not as Lewis sometimes either. Dillstar22 again. Second, do you think Aston can be any good next year? What are your thoughts on engine, car, Alonso? Well, as I've just said, I think they will be very good next year. I can't imagine how they wouldn't be unless there's some major glitch with the Stroll-Adrian Newey relationship, which of course is always possible. So engine, Honda, they'll be good. Adrian knows the Honda power unit stuff as well, people and the way Honda works. So that'll be pretty seamless, I think, for them. You've got to go into, if you're thinking about 26, you've got to think Aston Martin are going to be a front runner. I would be shocked if they're not capable of putting a car on the podium in the first 2 or 3 races next year. With Alonso driving, and if Alonso isn't chosen or he retires or whatever, I don't think he'll retire. He'll definitely want to be in that car, absolutely for sure. But if he's not, they will have somebody quick. People think maybe Max, I don't know. As I said before, I think he's done so well at Red Bull. It would be crazy for him to leave Red Bull before he knows if Red Bull have got a good car in 26. It's as simple as that. And he may know that by September. I doubt it. He really wouldn't know until they start running the cars. And then, of course, he's got to sit out 26. If the car's not that good, and he'll have to go to Aston. But I don't know. He might just pitch in and just say, right, we'll go to Aston. You see, there's some rumours about, in the Italian press, that Ollie Oakes, who has just resigned as team principal, who was a bit of a non-job when Flavio Briatore arrived, got to say. But even so, they were getting on quite well. And Ollie's a really good bloke. I love his racing brain, good guy. We've done some interviews with him on this channel. And he resigned very suddenly last week, or early this week, actually. And it turns out I think it's because his brother has got into a legal criminal drama. And his brother was a director of High Tech, which was still continuing to run. So Ollie, I guess, has had to resign from Alpine to sort that out. But the Italian press is saying, maybe Ollie's going to go to Red Bull and replace Christian Horner. Well, again, I suppose Christian can do whatever he wants, and he may well retire at the end of this year and decide he's had enough. And if all that's happening, then that really would mean Max will think again about maybe staying and would look at going to Aston Martin. So I'm not saying, if Ollie Oakes is coming, Max will leave. He'll probably think, I agree, most of us think Ollie's a good bloke, and he'll probably think, that'd be good. But, it's not quite the same, is it? You got John Wheatley doing a good job now at Sauber. You've got Adrian at Aston Martin. You've got Rob Marshall at McLaren. The golden days of Red Bull very, very quickly going away, although it's still a good race team. It's kind of a good race team. More dramas in the pit lane recently than we've seen from Red Bull ever, really. And ultimately, it's only a P4 car on a day when he's on the pole and leads the Grand Prix, which is not very good either. So we'll see. Can we say, well, let's see how it is after the Spanish Grand Prix when the whole front wing revision thing comes into play? Well, everybody's had so long to get ready for that I can't imagine it's going to change much anyway. I was talking to Scarbs about that during the week, and he said, yeah, I can't see it changing much either. So, it's maybe Max will be in that in that Aston Martin. Aaron Lee. Hi, Peter. Do you find teams nowadays place more, less, or about the same emphasis on developing cars for next season as opposed to the current season than in past decades? Well, there's a little bit more talk about it, partly because of the whole budget cap thing and you're having to allocate funds for next year's car and this year's car and all that stuff. But generally, there's a pattern in racing, which is that if you're very quick and you're fighting for a championship with another team, you focus on that, thank you very much. But if you're in an Aston Martin situation and you're not going very well, you think, oh yeah, 26. It's nothing magical about that. So I think, yeah, in answer to your question, I think the budget cap makes people a little bit more circumspect about how they spend their money on this year's car or next year's car. But it really depends how you're going at the moment. I think Mercedes are probably in quite a difficult position because it looks like they're starting to understand kind of how to run this car. I mean, they'd really like to sign off from 2025 saying, right, we totally understand what we got wrong and what we need to be doing now to make this car work. Okay, it may have no relevance to the 26 car, but at least we can draw a line under it and we know what we were doing wrong. I'm not sure they're at that stage yet. I think they're a bit nearer to that point. And so there's always an attraction for continuing to work on the current car so that you can get all the answers you need. As I say, 26 is so different that maybe that doesn't apply anymore. And everyone will just be thinking, oh, thank goodness we got rid of these cars. Everybody except McLaren, that is. And we'll see what happens in 26. Sema Dragon. Hello, Peter and chat. Hello there. Welcome. Nick THKS. Nick Thix. Hi, Peter. Do you think countries with multiple great circuits should swap them around every couple of years for variety? E.g. Suzuka and Fuji. Great circuit, Fuji. The first person I think I've ever heard call Fuji a great racetrack. I think it's one of the worst racetracks in the world, actually. Totally boring track. But Suzuka, by contrast, is brilliant. Anyway, yeah. Sorry if I offended you. I know what you're getting at, though. Should we have Zolder in Belgium as well as Spa? That's a good example. Yeah, I'm in Silverstone. Brands, Donington. I don't know. It's all a question of money and who can get the money and who can't. I think before we get around to swapping within a country, I think we need to work out why we haven't got a German or a French Grand Prix, bearing in mind how important those two countries are, not only to current Formula One, but to the history and heritage of Formula One. And we don't have a German Grand Prix. We don't have a French Grand Prix. What's that all about? We need to get that sorted. And a lot of it is local financing, and you'll find that one circuit is able to get a track together and another won't. But it's all these days the way it works. It's all local governments and grants and everything else. Speaking of which, I will just show you these. There's two pictures from Diego Marino, who lives in Madrid, who sent these to me yesterday, actually. He was just driving around the circuit layout. Looks a bit like Tripoli there with the palm trees, isn't it? The old Tripoli circuit in 35. And you can see an earth mover on the right, something happening. And his caption for the picture on the left was, I hope they keep the palm trees. Well, yeah, so do I. I can't. If I was one of those palm trees, I would be concerned for my health, though, because I think they'll probably be coming down very sadly. They're calling it the Mad Ring, aren't they? MADRANG. I don't think that's a very good name. Mad Ring sounds a bit odd anyway. I know what they're trying to get at, the Madrid Ring. But then how many American people, for example, and don't forget how big Formula One is in America now, we're all being told how big it is, call a circuit a ring? I don't think they do they? So Mad Ring may work in, I don't know where it'll work actually. Might work in Spain, I guess. The Madrid. But I think a lot of people think, what's that all about? Weren't they? Anyway. So there's that one. Thank you very much. What else have we got here? What are you saying? Especially when a track like Fuji hosted both Lewis and Fernando's best performances obviously, and the quality of Suzuka is unquestionable. Well, you're kind of answering, coming back from what I said. Yeah, but not because it's a great track. I mean, that just happened to be races. One was wet and all that stuff. Yeah, you've had some races at very boring circuits, but you're actually saying great circuits. So anyway, I would hate to see the Japanese Grand Prix go to Fuji, I have to say. I'd love to see it stay at Suzuka forevermore, which I think it probably will. But having said that, Fuji is close to the heart of Toyota, isn't it? So you never know. If Toyota make noises and they want the race at Fuji, maybe F1 will go there. Recco says, hello, Peter from Milano. Ciao. I recently learned about Jim Clark's politics in Monza and with Italian police. Can't imagine the stress he was under, let alone witnessing a fatal crash firsthand. Well, yeah. It's not often talked about, that accident in 61, and he didn't witness it. He was actually part of the accident. And Taffy von Trips, who was potentially going to be world champion that day, was in one of the shark-nosed Ferraris, along with Richie Ginther, Pedro Rodriguez, and Phil Hill, and didn't know Jimmy was there. I mean, Jimmy had got a tow, and he didn't realize Jimmy was on his left, had pulled out and was on his left going towards the parabolica, and he sort of moved left for his line into the parabolica, and they touched. And Jimmy's Lotus 21 spun down the track, and he got out, but it was badly damaged. But sadly, Taffy's Sharknose barrel rolled into the crowd on the left and mowed down the crowd. 15 spectators were killed, and including Taffy, sadly, on that day. And Phil Hill won the race and won the championship. You know, just talk about, you cannot imagine that sort of tragedy happening today, really. But it did. And as you correctly say, Italy was, Italy was in shock. And as we now know, Bernie's approach to getting everybody out of the track at Imola in 94 as quickly as possible in case everything got impounded. All that was because of what happened at Monza in 61, when there was a lot of drama getting out of the circuit. And Jim Clark had to be smuggled out. And when he came back in 62, he had to be smuggled in, basically, into the track. And it was always a stressful thing for him. And he wasn't to blame. He just happened to be there. And it was a slipstreaming race. No question about that. So it was, very, very stressful. And when you think about Jimmy's career early on, I mean, his second Grand Prix, the Belgian Grand Prix, 2 drivers that he knew very well were killed. One was his teammate, Alan Stacey. The other was Chris Bristow, killed in that race. Sterling Moss had a near fatal accident in the same practice for the same race. And Mike Taylor, similarly, also in a Lotus 18, the car Jimmy race, had a big crash. And then fast forward to Monza 61 and that happening. This is in your first 2 years of Formula One. And yet still he became the driver that he was. Incredible, eh? Recco says, makes me think about Lando complaining about what to do with Max in turn 2. Just get on with it. Yeah, well, yeah, that's right. And I've got to say here, I was very impressed by Kimi Antonelli off the line in the sprint race when he felt that, he potentially had been driven off the track. And when they said no penalty, his response wasn't the response you would expect of an 18-year-old young kid who was, obviously very annoyed that he wasn't leading the race from the pole and somebody had had him off. And he just said, "Oh, good to know." And I thought that was a really good response. Said a lot about Kimi, didn't it? Very, very good. Yeah, exactly. And I think, race drivers today, if you think about what so many had gone through and did go through, a lot of them do cry and complain about just ridiculously stupid things. You're right. M.A. Khan, Peter, if Leclerc only wins 1 title, does that show what's wrong with Formula One? Lewis has had the fastest car for 11 years, winning 7. How many could Charles have won in the cars Lewis had? He's so unlucky. Well, yeah, spoken like a true Charles Leclerc fan, I guess. Yeah, you never know. Leclerc is different from Lewis. He's very similar in style, and that brilliant style they both had. In Lewis's case, had HAD. In Charles' case, still has. Very different backgrounds and characters. As I've said before, Charles much more emotional than Lewis and is more prone not under pressure, but in emotional moments, perhaps to making mistakes than Lewis. He's getting more. He's getting better on that area, but not still where he should be probably. Whereas Lewis has had this fairly seamless introduction to the sport, Formula One, great teams, and been in good cars and good teams for most of his life. So yeah, very different. I think not only Charles, I think Charles would have won a lot of races in a Mercedes, no doubt about it. I think Max for sure would have. And, you know, there's a lot of other guys out there who, not a lot of other guys out there, but there's, if you look at, let's say, Valtteri, you know, Valtteri did very well, didn't he, for himself when he was at Mercedes. So, yeah, he would have won a lot of races, Charles Leclerc, no doubt about that. Scroopy Noopers. Hi, Peter. At what point do you think McLaren should put all their eggs in one specific driver's basket this year, seeing as the manufacturer's title will probably be sewn up early for them? Well, I don't think, I mean, according to Zach's master plan, it's kind of working out at the moment. They don't need to apply team orders very much, apart from if they want to help Lando a little bit to get a few more points. And I think at this stage, Oscar might go along with that if it's easy for him to do so, not too damaging for him. That's about all that will happen. I mean, in reality, no team in the world really in their situation would apply team orders until one driver is mathematically out of the championship. And even then, if nobody can beat them into P2, then why do it anyway? So the way things are going, they don't need to worry about it. But if Lando wins the next 4 races, then I don't think they'll do anything. I think they'll just let them race and carry on as they have and hope that it sort of settles itself organically rather than through somebody telling them what to do. As I say, it's not a comfortable situation, and they wouldn't be in this situation if they had a more balanced team, if they had Piastri, Ricciardo, or Lando, Ricciardo, for example. But they don't. They've got these 2 guys who are both very capable of winning the championship. Lando's going through a bad patch at the moment, and Oscar's getting better and better. But Lando could easily come back, and Oscar knows that for sure. So, in answer to your question, I don't think they'll do anything really dramatic unless there's a mathematical reason to do so. Radu Andre Marianescu. Thank you for this question. Podcast by Matt Bishop and Richard Williams about Jim Clark. They told how you had your first encounter with Jimmy at Sydney Airport, or your Porsche Boxster, powder blue. That's a piece of history right there. Yeah, I did. I mean, my first encounter with Jimmy was not at Sydney Airport. It was actually at Warwick Farm Racetrack, and I went up with a copy of his book, Jim Clark at the Wheel, and asked him to sign it, and had a few pictures that I wanted him to sign, which he did straight away. And then I got into this whole thing from 66 onwards of ringing the airport when I knew they were more or less going to be arriving from New Zealand, from the 4 races there they've been doing, to see if they were on a specific flight. And if they were, because I was on holiday at that time from school, going out to the airport and seeing them arrive. That was my chance to see Jim Clark and Jackie Stewart, or Jim Clark particularly. And yeah, and the last time I did that was when he was leaving Australia in 68. After the Longford race, he came via Sydney and was flying to Chicago to go on to Indianapolis to test the turbine Lotus, Indy Lotus, the wedge-shaped car. And I went to the airport, and there he was, and I sort of waved as he left, and he sort of waved a little bit. There's a bit of a group there, but his plane didn't take off. It taxied out, and then it came back. There was some sort of fault. And I was the only person left in the airport. And he said, "Oh, you're still here. Come and have a coffee." Or a drink, I think he said. And so I sat down, and Jimmy had the stewardess, the flight attendant with him, which is, what's she doing there? Anyway, we sat down, we had a drink, and I had a Coke, I think Jimmy had a Coke, actually, from memory. And we chatted about Formula One a long time. Yeah, it's brilliant. About my Boxster, what's all that? Powder blue. Yeah, that's light blue, obviously. I had a Boxster. I had a couple of Boxsters. I had a red one, and then I got a Tiptronic one, which I had spec'd in light blue. And that's only famous because I parked it once in Portobello Road in London on a Saturday afternoon and came back, and there was a note on the windscreen saying, "I love the colour of this car. Give me a ring, Paul Smith." And it was Paul Smith, the designer, and his phone number on it. Very cool. Well, he was very cool. His clothing brand is very cool. And the Boxster was very cool as well. I've now got another car, the same color, which is the Hyundai i20N. One of the reasons I got it, actually, I love powder blue cars. And I've never had a powder blue Lotus Elan. I've got a red one and a yellow one, but I'd love to have a blue one. I think it's the right color for sports cars. Some cars don't look good in powder blue, but a lot of them do. And these days, if you go to any car park anywhere in the world and you remove all the white, off-white, black, metallic grey cars from the car park, there's not much left. So why is that? I just can't work it out. Why do people not want nice colours anymore for cars? What is it about that? Bearing in mind, Jim Clark set the tone of the whole thing when he painted his Porsche 356 white, because he felt it was the safest colour in those days when he was doing a lot of night driving, and it would stand out against the black of the road. It was for safety reasons. Yeah, I get it with white, but why would so many people have black and metallic grey cars when it doesn't stand out? You'd think with all this safety conscious world in which we live that it would be illegal to have cars that colour. There you go. George Pilakos, hi from Gothenburg, Sweden. Hi there. Yeah, Sweden, another of my favourite countries. Attended many Swedish Grand Prix at Anderstorp, Clips, F1. Salute, young sir. Thank you very much. I really enjoy that use of the word young there. He says, having spoken to Nigel Mansell yesterday on the phone, and we were, Nigel was telling me about his aches and pains, and I was telling him about my aches and pains, and there you go, two old men talking away. But Nigel, just in case you're wondering, is in very good form now. He's had a few ops recently, but he's his whole basis on how he is what his golf handicap is right now, and it's 3 at the moment. And he recently won a tournament, 2 under par gross on the second day. So he's feeling pretty good about life. Pretty good. Bob, hi Peter. You've taught me, we had a good laugh actually. I should tell you about it. We had a good laugh about Lewis's radio stuff in Miami. Nigel was cracked up. He didn't hear all of it. When I told him that Lewis had said, oh, when you guys have finished having a cup of tea, let me know what to do. And he cracked up on that. He thought that was very good. Although I have to say, the more I think about all that, the more the whole thing kind of sickens me that it's out there, because it's not really how it should be. I mean, it's very poor. Nothing to do with Lewis or Charles at this point. I'm talking about the management. They shouldn't be that disorganized. And it's unprofessional, I think, that sort of stuff. But it was funny. Obviously, one laughs when one hears it. Bob says, hi, Peter, you've taught me so much about Formula One. Eh? Really? Good. Well, thank you. And it certainly has aided in my enjoyment of the sport. Well, that's nice to hear, Bob. Thank you very much. For some reason, it's not coming up. I don't know why. Let me have a go. I think it's because... Oh, yeah, there you go. There's Bob. Thank you very much. Nice to hear. And I've got to say, so many good questions and comments, nice questions and comments, that I learn a lot from you guys as well. And without you, we wouldn't have a show anyway. So big thanks to everybody out there currently watching and who will watch or listen to this live stream. Gerald Kaiser, good morning, everyone. Yeah, good morning to you, Gerald. That means it's... What does that mean? You could be very early morning on the east coast of America. Equally, could be just a late riser here in Europe. Zishan Afsar, Peter, after Lewis's radio messages from Miami, do you think Ferrari needs a shake-up? They seem to have a chronic inability to make a decisive decision from the pit wall. Well, as I said in the video, I don't think it's their inability to make I mean, they do have that inability. I'm not sure they're any worse than a lot of teams. But the reality is none of that should have been discussion points anyway. It should all have been decided before the race, particularly if you're going to start your 2 cars on 2 different compounds. It's just absolutely Formula 4 straightforward managerial stuff that you have a policy meeting before the race to discuss what's going to happen if your 2 cars happen to be running nose to tail on these different tyre compounds and one of them's quicker than another because of that. What are we going to do? It's not difficult. You can put through a couple of scenarios and you make your decision on what you're going to do. You don't have a live discussion in the middle of the race. Oh, this is real surprise for us. Here's Lewis, he's on the medium and he's right behind Charles on the hard, and Lewis is going quicker. Oh, we never thought that might happen. What are we going to do? I mean, it was just pathetic. Why wouldn't they have discussed that beforehand and come to a straight decision on what to do? It's not difficult. As Maurice Nunn, the great Maurice Nunn, Ensign Formula 1 team, great race engineer, Ensign Formula 3 car, great Formula 3 car. Always used to say, there's no magic, it's just logic. And I got to say, as I said to Cameron the other day, I'm very disappointed, really, that, well, we should be disappointed. Sounds arrogant, but we should all be disappointed that that hasn't come with Freddie Vasseur. You imagine that that's what he would be, a complete disciplinarian, very, very organised, very, very rigid in the way the team is structured. And I've got to say, to some extent, that's how I think Jean Todt was. And you'd imagine that Vasseur would be sort of Jean Todt 2.0 in that respect, but he's not. Well, by the evidence, he's not. And then again, if you look at that, and then you say, and also, he didn't get Adrian Newey, and he has decided to stick with the homegrown boys and girls, and he's actually said, and he will be kind of in charge of parts of the technology himself. And then they didn't get Adrian. I've always said that if you've got Charles Leclerc and Carlos Sainz, and you've got, I don't know, €1 billion to spend, would you spend that on Lewis Hamilton, or would you spend that on Adrian Newey? They didn't actually need Lewis Hamilton. They've got Charles Leclerc and Carlos Sainz. What they needed was Adrian Newey. It would have been much better to have spent the money on Adrian than they have on Lewis. I just don't get it. And you could say, oh, well, all the branding and everything else that Lewis brings and the experience in the 7 World Championships. Well, how many World Championships has Adrian Newey won? And what's more important, the car or the driver? And yep, the branding, I agree. But if you're winning races and championships, Ferrari's branding takes care of itself. It will just happen anyway. And I think, I don't know for sure. I don't think any of us will ever know. But if it did come down to, well, we've got a certain amount of money here. We can spend it on having Lewis Hamilton in the team. Wow. Or we can spend it on having Adrian Newey do the car for us. Wow. I would have gone for Adrian Newey. Absolutely, for sure. But they didn't. They went for Lewis. And I don't get it. I really don't get it. Nothing against Lewis, because I've always loved Lewis and loved watching him drive. And I'm kind of sad now that he's not driving as well as he apparently used to. Well, he's apparently not driving as well as he used to. That's what I mean to say. And I think it's difficult for him. It's very difficult. As I said, if you're a race driver of Lewis's ilk, there are days and moments when you just want to be a race driver and you want to go to Maranello and you want to just have spaghetti with the boys around the corner, and you don't want the paparazzi around, and you don't want management around, you don't want the sponsors around, you don't want this around, you don't want it to be a palaver, you just want to be a race driver and talk to them and get to know them and learn a few things about the car or whatever it is. And he can't do that, because the minute he steps anywhere near Italy or Maranello, he's so big that he becomes, the Lewis Hamilton brand. And that's a problem, because he's never really had to deal with that at Mercedes, and certainly at McLaren for sure, obviously. But even at Mercedes, I think Toto Wolff did a pretty good job of Lewis being able to be Lewis Hamilton race driver when he needed to be at the factory and around the factory. And I just don't think he can do that at Ferrari. I'm not saying that's the reason for the issues. That's just one of the things, and one of the reasons that Carlos Sainz, Charles Leclerc was not a bad driver combination all along. Defense ruining system, DRS. Thank you, Vertec, DRS. Absolutely. And this whole business of overtakes. Oh, this circuit had more overtakes than that circuit. We got to go there. It's pathetic. It's so childish. And Grand Prix racing is about cat and mouse. It's about pulling away. It's about forcing the guy behind you into a mistake. It's about the guy behind forcing the guy in front into a mistake. It is all that cat and mouse business. And there should be, just as there is an advantage for the guy behind, there should be the possibility of an advantage for the guy in front as well. One way of doing that is to get rid of DRS completely. But now they're going to the push to pass. And push to pass, there's even more reason to have this for defense. And that's because push to pass will be instant, whereas DRS, excuse me, a bit of hay fever looming in the air. I haven't got any doors or windows open, so I don't know what's happening, but it was actually really good yesterday because it was raining here in Spain. This morning, beautifully crisp. I was out with Dexter, no hay fever, everything slightly wet, but blue skies, sun, lovely. Now it's hay fever time again. Sorry, anyway, I'll carry on as best I can. And with DRS, of course, there's always that business where it's gaining momentum before it gets its full thing, whereas it's instant with this new thing they're going to have next year. Even more reason for the guy in front to have this defense option as well. And don't forget, you can then reharvest the engine whenever you like. So it becomes a strategy. And the guy in front may decide to use his ability to get away, and he knows he's going to reharvest in two laps time, and the guy behind may be in the middle of harvesting. All sorts of things can come into play, but it'll only work if they allow the guy in front also to have the same push power, instant power, in my opinion. That's how it should work, and they've got the opportunity to do that now. But of course they won't do it because they're so absolutely ingrained into thinking that overtaking is the only thing that it's all about. Let's have a small break. Not a break, just something else completely different. What do you think of that? I've always been saying it's such a shame. I love that car, the Yaris GR Rally 1. Of course, there'll be lots of them in Portugal next weekend, and probably they'll go very well. They've won every rally so far this year. But recently they've had this weird black livery. And they've obviously been watching this channel. It's still not bright enough for me, but it's definitely a step in the right direction away from the black. I definitely like that. So well done, as ever, to Toyota, doing a really good job with that. Anyway, back to the defense ruining system. Yeah, well, there you go. I'm glad some people agree with me. Again, from Radu Marianescu, for those who said that you're old, they shouldn't have the privilege to watch this podcast. You're one of the few who knows Formula One inside out. This is history right here. All the best from Romania. Thank you very much. The country that invented the jet engine. Yeah, I've always had a soft spot. And of course, Dacia, as Elfyn Evans likes to call it. Dacia Duster. I'd rather have a Dacia Duster than one of these things, he said recently when driving that new Ferrari estate car thing they've got, or SUV, whatever it is. Yeah, big fan of Elfyn as well. Anyway, that's a completely different story. Thank you very much. Yeah, well, I'm still learning all the time from you guys mainly, and I don't always have all the answers. That's for sure, and I often get things wrong. But thank you for being tolerant, and also thank you for giving me the opportunity to express my opinion about things. And quite often I think they're very different from everybody else's. And for example, this chat about active arrow at the moment, everybody else seems to be talking about the push to pass and how they're going to get that power, and should they detune the engine so they have even more power, all that stuff. I'm kind of okay with all the push to pass, providing we could also do it for the car in front. But it's active arrow that scares me, to be honest. It really scares me when they start playing around with arrow, making them so quick in a straight line, totally dependent on the system working when they want it to work. And sometimes when they want it to work isn't going to be the right place anyway. And I'm very nervous about, we've had issues with just the rear wing on DRS, and now we're bringing the front wing into play as well. And I don't like all that artificial playing around with things. I just, if you want to make the cars quick in a straight line, here's an idea. Get rid of all the arrow completely. Oh no! Then where will we put the sponsors? What bodywork? Bob, with age comes wisdom. Sometimes, anyway. Yeah. Well, there you go. Old Flav at Alpine is probably the oldest team principal, is he? Christian, you got a long way to go yet before you think of retiring. There's Flav back doing a good job. Well, doing the job that he's always done, basically. And I've heard a rumour, again, I'm not a great rumour monger person, but I got to pass this one on, that there are going to be a few people leaving, more people leaving Alpine around the August break time as well. So probably Flav's got a whole new team of people he's going to bring in there, all the old Ligier lot or something like that, probably. So yeah, that's to be seen in the future, I guess. But how do we get onto that? Oh, age. There you go. Francois Olivier. Are the 26 regulations going to improve close car racing? I don't think they are. No, that's not the premise of them. The premise is to bring more manufacturers into the sport by having this incredibly complicated hybrid 50% electric engine. And now we have Ford in, and Honda have decided to remain, and Audi are in. So and Cadillac, that's been a big success. But nobody's thinking now, but how are we going to make the racing closer? Well, they've got the push to pass, I suppose, what they're all relying upon. And then they've got their active arrow, which make them super quick in a straight line. And nobody's thinking what's going to happen to Formula One's stock on Wall Street if there are a couple of big shunts and the racing isn't close because the engines are so complicated that only a couple of teams have got them right. What will happen? Anyway, in answer to your question, Francois, the premise of this is not to make the racing closer, as distinct from the 22 regulations, which was all about making the racing closer, so close that they still need DRS. And but this time we're going to have 50% electric Formula One engines. So look forward to that. Bob saying probably not. Kind of agrees with me. Thank you for answering that one, Bob. David Wilson, good morning, sir, and hope you're doing great. Enjoy listening to you on your commentary. Thank you very much. Ujo, you've talked about the whole Alpine saga already. Well, kind of, Ujo. We know obviously about Ollie leaving, and we know about, I think, the very punitive decision to replace Jack Doohan, who just after the race where he's outqualified Pierre Gasly. I know Pierre had problems, but it's not as if Jack didn't have problems either. So, that was not good. And Franco Colapinto coming in with no explanation yet really about why he crashed twice in the Brazilian Grand Prix in the wet. But nonetheless, I guess we'll give him a pass on that, as everybody else has. And is replacing Jack Doohan, supposedly for 5 races, but who knows how long that'll go on for. Jack is staying on, I guess, because contractually they have to pay him. And he will be in the garage being filmed by FOM with a headset on, like all these other guys who never get in the car. Sadly, but I hope he does get another opportunity. I really do. I rate that Jack Doohan, and I think he's been treated badly there. And about Ollie Oakes, he says it's nothing to do with the Jack thing, his resignation. It was a personal thing, which we now know to be related, I guess, to his brother being arrested for some criminal activity involving large amounts of cash. Seems odd he'd be arrested for that. I mean, isn't that what most race teams deal with all the time anyway? Oops, shouldn't be saying that. And I guess Ollie's going back to sort out high tech because his brother was a director of high tech, and to sort that out. And there are rumours that he might even go to Red Bull, but I'm saying I find it hard to understand why Christian would retire at this stage, or maybe even be retired by Red Bull. But people are talking about that. And I've mentioned also that I've heard that quite a lot of more Alpine people are going to be leaving mid-season of their own choice, not being fired or anything. So a bit of an implosion potentially going on there, but we'll see. They're switching to, what is it? I can't remember if it's Merc or Ferrari engines. I guess it's Ferrari, is it? Or maybe Merc, I don't know. Merc engines probably next year. And so it goes on. Yeah, chaos and flav. But there again, did we expect anything less? I can't imagine the Renault people are very happy about any of this either. The engine won't be used anymore in Formula One next year. And look at all this stuff going on as well. It's all a bit messy, isn't it? It's not really what you would expect of a large manufacturer in Formula One. And bear in mind, the whole premise of this championship, the new regulations, is to have all these manufacturers in. Personally, I'd much rather have great race teams in Formula One as distinct from lots of manufacturers. But that's just me. Sarosh Soman, Peter was following Leclerc in Miami. He was all short corners, flat car, and looked to be on top of the car. Wow, very Rob Wilson-esque. But the car wasn't competitive at all. He was extracting the maximum from the car. He was absolutely on it and not making mistakes. I mean, as I've said with Charles, he does make a few errors on the way up to the race. But generally speaking, sprint race, formation lap aside, or reconnaissance lap, he doesn't make mistakes. It was only a sprint race anyway. Who cares? So, yeah, he drove beautifully, didn't he? He drove really well. And imagine how frustrated he was with the whole hard medium thing. But he did come up with a great comment. I love that comment when he eventually given the position to Lewis. He says, I can't, tell Lewis to go faster. My tyres are getting too hot. Of course, Lewis couldn't go any faster then because his tyres had gone off as well. Well done, Ferrari. Bob, going back to V8s or V10s with biofuels will make racing better. Well, make the sound better, that's for sure, and make it cheaper. And because it was just, normally aspirated V8s or 10s, that's much cheaper. They went from a sort of 10, 12 million pound a year package for a V10 engine deal from a company like, say, Toyota, to hybrid engines, which were at least 24 overnight, if not 27 overnight for a package. So more than doubled overnight, just going from V8s as they were, because V10s then went to V8s to hybrid, was it 2014? And it's got more expensive still since then, despite the budget cap. I mean, that would have been the simple thing. Forget the budget cap, let's just go back to normally aspirated V8s. Don't need the budget cap then. So Bob says Formula E is for electric, and I won't repeat the next word because it's probably not very appropriate. But it's not, it's for electric people. Having said that, years ago, when I was I came to England about 71, 72, and I was, well, I'll put it up. It was the B word there. And I won't say it audibly because this all goes out as a podcast as well. But say it audibly, that's a bit of tautology. Anyway, I didn't know that word. We didn't have that word in Australia. And there was a big laugh going on about how Frank Williams had said that on the radio or something. And I didn't know what the hell they were on about. Anyway, that's the end of that story. This is a super chat. Don't Sulk 22. Well, there's a good name. At the press conference, Oscar said he and Lando would be at McLaren for many years. Lando looked like he's in a living nightmare. I predict Lando will leave. Yeah, I think Oscar really, he's just basing it on the reality that Lando has a long-term contract, but he's not basing it on the reality of Lando having to race against Oscar Piastri, which is quite endearing, isn't it, that Oscar would think that way. But you're right, I can't imagine Lando's enjoying this. But any more than I said he would enjoy it. I couldn't believe he'd renewed his contract as early as he did in 23 for 20, or was it 24 for 25? And now he's done it again. Yeah, they all love Zach and the whole McLaren conference centre thing and, the boulevard. It's all wonderful stuff. But at the end of the day, you want to win the World Championship if you're in a World Championship winning car, do you not? And Lando Norris would have had a much easier job if he didn't have Oscar Piastri in the other car. But he has. So there you go. Zishan Afsar. Peter, what did you make of the turn one incident between Max and Lando? The difference in the time it took Oscar and Lando to get the move done on Max. Well, yeah. There was a number of points here. One is that I think Lando immediately, this is a problem with modern Formula One. I think the minute it happened and Max sort of came across on him, Lando thought, he's going to get a penalty now. This is mega for me. And that was his main thing, the penalty thing. And the reality is he shouldn't have been thinking that way at all. He should have been thinking, don't worry about the penalty. May happen, may not. This is in a trillisecond. He should have been thinking this. I'll filter him behind Max now. There's no way to get him on the outside here. Easy to pass him 3 laps into the race with DRS. That's what he should have been thinking. Win the race. But he didn't. He thought, I should have been leading this Grand Prix. He's had me off. He should get a penalty. And it was wrong. It was the wrong approach. And I think that was because of the pressure he's got in having to beat Oscar. So that's where the pressure shows. It's not only just pace. It's things like that. Not thinking clearly. And then with the Oscar thing and how easily he made it to pass Max, it's because Max, he doesn't fear Oscar by any way, but he actually respects Oscar a lot as a racing driver who gets the job done. And if your tyres are going off in the Red Bull and you're trying to brake as late as possible into turn one to defend, you're probably going to make a mistake if it's Oscar Piastri there. And he did. He locked up and went wide. Second time he'd done that in the race. First lap and then. So that's why it was easy for Oscar, because Oscar Piastri has something over Max. He doesn't have something over Max, but Max would think about Oscar Piastri. But with Lando, it's never an issue for Max. His tyres had gone off even more. He had less grip when he was racing with Lando. And he made no mistakes at all because it's Lando Norris, you got to be joking. And it was just like, drive around. You can pass me when you want, Lando, on the outside or whatever. And he eventually got him, as he would have got him had he just filtered in behind him at the start. He got him on DRS. And there's nothing Max could do about it then. But it took Lando a long time, as you say, to do that. And it's all to do with the problems Lando's got in trying to beat Oscar Piastri. That's what that's all about. It's not just a clean-cut, Oscar is better in traffic than Lando Norris. It's a lot of things all coming together and combining in the minds of Lando Norris, Max Verstappen, and, of course, Oscar Piastri. Bob is saying to Don't Sulk 22, if Oscar wins the World Drivers' Championship, Lando will look to leave. Yeah, well, he may not. He may go in the Gilles Villeneuve mode of thinking, it was Oscar's turn in 25. It's my turn in 26. Isn't this great? And then 26 will come along. Oops. McLaren Mercedes actually isn't a very good car. They got something wrong with it. And the race-winning car is the Aston Martin, and the factory Mercedes is brilliant, and the Ferrari is suddenly right up there. You can never ever bank on the next year's car being your championship winning car, any more than Lando should have said when he crossed the line winning in Abu Dhabi last year, next year's my year. Cool thing to say. Sarosh Soman, Peter, referring to the grid slot preference to the pole position, 1990 Suzuka, would Senna have hit if it was Mansell instead of Prost? My mind went to that scenario. I don't know why. Well, I mean, that was... What you're saying is if the same thing had happened, Senna had said, I want to be on the left-hand side, and Balest had said, no, you must start from the right, and it was Nigel Mansell on his left, would Senna have driven into Nigel instead of driving into Prost? Answer, yes. I think Ayrton would have done that for sure, because he was trying to make the point that it was his way of making the point, rather obtusely, that if you're going to put me on this disadvantage, even though I've got the pole, I'm going to take an abnormal risk going into turn one, and if the tyres are cold and I hit somebody, that's your fault. Balest. That's basically what he was trying to say. And I don't think Prost got that message, but I think he would have done it to Nigel, because there was always, not bad blood, but there was never good blood between Nigel and Ayrton Senna, going back to, well, a couple of things. Obviously Spa 87, when on the first lap, Ayrton was in front of Nigel for the lead. He was leading the race, came out of Pouin and basically came out of the power. Effective brake test for Nigel, which he used to do a lot in Formula 3 with Martin Brundle. And Nigel was forced to flick left and did, and then was ahead of Ayrton going into Stavelot and caught Ayrton's left front and Nigel's right rear. And then famously, after he retired later on, about 10 laps later, Nigel, I was with the team then, it was all quite spectacular. Nigel got out of the car. And I think his first thing was, what have the stewards done about Ayrton? And nothing had happened. And he was completely shocked and astonished that no action had been taken against Ayrton for brake testing him. And so he went down to the McLaren pit to sort of take action himself. I don't think he would have done that had it been 2025 and the stewards and Senna's move been under investigation or whatever. So that's why he went down. And Nigel being Nigel, he just grabbed him and shook him around a bit. And then there was lots of stuff, wasn't there? There was Portugal, 91 Barcelona, when after Portugal 91, Nigel did a really good job at the first corner. I'm a biased Nigel Mansell man. There are lots of gaps. He just went through all the gaps and passed Ayrton and passed everyone, Berger. And then in the driver's briefing in Spain, the next race, Balest said, this reckless driving at the start has got to stop. And Nigel Mansell, you are guilty. And Nigel stood up and said, I'm guilty. What about Ayrton Senna? And Ayrton said, what about you? You've been crazy all these years. All that was going on. And then when it got into the race, it was drying track, and Nigel was catching Ayrton. This is the passive suspension 14A, and he gets a tow from Ayrton, no DRS, and goes down the inside into turn one into Barcelona. And there's that famous photograph of the two of them side by side, top gear, probably 180 mile an hour, half an inch apart. Ayrton absolutely convinced that Nigel would brake first, as everybody always did against Ayrton. He was the latest of late breakers, but perfectly so, very rarely locked up, apart from chicane at Suzuka with Prost, of course, or turn one with Prost. They were different things. But Nigel was never going to be, even though Nigel was offline, Nigel would never brake until Ayrton braked. And the minute Ayrton touched the brakes, Nigel touched the brakes and he's gone inside. Got a beautiful pass. But there was a quite risky thing to do, because he was going to get Ayrton anyway and the track was drying, but he was offline on the wet, and so that was that. And what was then there was something else happened after that. Anyway, so I think, there was never any, they weren't buddies, that's for sure, Ayrton and Nigel. And I think Ayrton would have driven into him with pleasure, actually, for sure. Oh, that was the other thing, yeah. In 88, when Nigel was in that passive Williams, the active Williams, went passive for the British Grand Prix when he finished second, very good drive. That year, Ayrton was he was very good buddies with Frank Williams, and Frank used to love Ayrton, and they used to talk on the phone on the Mondays after every race. and Ayrton would ring, and quite often, and Frank told me this, quite often Ayrton would be saying, oh, I wasn't impressed with Nigel doing that, and Mansell, your driver is... And after a while, he started banging on about how Frank should get rid of Nigel and replace him with Maurizio Gugelmin, who was Ayrton's mate, and he'd won Macau, I think, Formula 3. A very good driver, Maurizio. Lovely guy, always got on well with him, great, very good driver. Drove the Leighton House, the Adrian Newey Leighton House, very well with Ivan Capelli. But Ayrton, I thought it was very off, and of course this filtered back to Nigel through the Brazilian press. I thought it was very off for a driver from a rival team to ring a team principal of another team and start trashing their driver to them on a Monday night and suggest somebody else to take their place. I mean, that always stuck in Nigel's gullet, I think. And so, yeah. Now, the big question is, I think the way we could rephrase this question is, for sure, Ayrton would have tried to drive into Nigel, but what would Nigel have done? That's the question. I think Nigel would have predicted that was going to happen, and he might well have done a double switch or something, and it may not have ended up as it ended up with Alan in the boonies. Nigel was pretty good on things like that. He was pretty good at reading other drivers and what they were about to do. For reference, Silverstone 87, Nelson Piquet. Brands Hatch 86, Nelson Piquet. Brands Hatch 85, Keke Rosberg. He was pretty good, Nigel, in that respect. So there we go. Don't tell me I've got this frozen thing again. It's all jumping around this box, this question box. It's about this time every live stream that it happens, isn't it? Maybe everything's getting too hot. Maybe I'll plug in. I've got a fan on this stand here. Excuse me. How do I do that? Oh, I can't do that without pulling something out. Oh, so I can do it like that. Hang on one second. Let's pull the power cord out. Put that in there, and then we've got some cooling brake ducts for the, there you go, for the fan. That's better. Do you see that video that came out this week, speaking of brake ducts, about how phasing of materials inside the brake drum, when it gets hot, it gets cool, and when it gets cool, it gets hot, according to how McLaren want to do it, is the reason McLaren are so quick now? It's quite an interesting video from a guy that I think he did a bit of work with McLaren at one point, an engineer. But I was confused by it though, because the premise of the video is that the McLaren advantage is that they are very good at managing their tyres, which is why they're always quick in Sector 3 in qualifying, which isn't the case. They're actually, as we've seen, Sector 3 in Saudi Arabia for Max wasn't bad, and Sector 3 in Miami, he was right with them. And it's not just a time management thing. McLaren have got a massive amount of grip compared with everybody else, as shown by how slow they are in top speed, usually through the trap. So it was an interesting video about the use of different materials and the phasing of these materials, but the premise of it, to me, didn't make any sense. Maybe I'm missing something there. Anyway. Says, Punctured Ball says, just listening to your last vid, maybe, then realise you're live. Oh, that's very good. Thank you very much. So you're watching, I think, the Active Arrow vid, and then you realised I was live. So welcome. Thank you very much. I am indeed. And I've talked a little bit about that video, and I hope you kind of understood it. It's well, I'm sure you did understand it. It's just a question of expressing a view that's probably a little bit different from most on that 26 car rigs things. Formula One Hensel, good day, Mr. Windsor. Hope you're doing well and chat. I am indeed. This is not quite sure why I'm going to say this now. I guess it's that name Hensel, which I'm sure it's not, but it reminds me of Austrian names. And on that score, I just wanted to say that I was thinking the other day about my journalistic Austrian friend Helmut Zwickel, who passed away a month or so ago. And I just want to say how much I miss him. Really, really good journalist, always helpful and kind to me in my journalistic career. And in later years, did a brilliant job running a classic car rally in Austria. And so Helmut Zwickel, and made me think of Helmut Zwickel by having a question from F1 Hensel. That makes sense. Max Flashshot said, that is a wild looking car. Oh, I guess he's talking about the Toyota Yaris. Yeah, it is. It's a great car, that beauty of a car, also says Hensel. It is a beautiful car, that Yaris. And I told you the story but I'm going to repeat it because it's such a mega thing, about Miyada driving one. Sorry, Toyota, the chairman of the company. And this just shows how good it is to have a really cool guy at the top of a company who can basically do what he wants with the company, as distinct from a corporate board. You have to still prove everything. And just saying he wants a fly handbrake on the Yaris GR, the next version, so that he can just pull the handbrake on and do proper handbrake turns with it. What a great thing. I'm gonna have to order one of those. Too many cars already, but I have to get another one. I'm ordering at the moment. We were down there last night. This is a great story, actually. We're ordering a Rally 2 Skoda Fabia, which they're only available in Spain, limited edition. And they send the cars over. They get to Barcelona, and then they strip them down, stiffen them, lower them, different livery, and you get the OZ wheels and all the cool things. And then it goes to ABT for a black box update, 190 horsepower. So it's going to be a cool car. Anyway, we had to go to Skoda yesterday. I said, oh, Peter, there's a problem with the delivery. It's going to be 2 months late because we're going to have to change the way we order it. We do this work with ABT and nothing that, it's not a problem. I can wait another 2 months. It's no big issue for me. But he said, this is the cool bit. He said, so in compensation, we'd like to fit a full sports exhaust system now, no cost to you, which will be compatible now, of course, with the ABT power upgrade. So yeah, mega, getting a nice exhaust system on the car too. In the day of electric cars and saving the planet, I'm going to be driving this car around with the Hyundai i20N. They're going to look good. One of them, the Hyundai's light blue, of course, and the Skoda's going to be bright green, mamba green, as Skoda Fabias should be, Rally 2 versions. So yeah, then we can add the Yaris to that in good time, I think. Benzie News' Showdown. Good day and good morning, Peter and chat. Love these old videos. The sound too, excellent POV video, mate. Thank you very much. Sounds like you're in Australia, mate. Yeah, g'day. I thought of you guys this morning when I was saying earlier, I went out for an early morning walk with, I call him the D-Dog, but it's Dexter, who's asleep at my feet at the moment. And it was just like the old days when I used to get off the ferry at Circular Quay and then get the bus to Rose Bay at circa 7:45 in the morning, 8 o'clock, and the smell of the grass in Hyde Park, and there was always a slightly sort of sickly beer smell from Pitt Street area, but that early morning Sydney smell after rain in the night, from the flowers, from the grass, eucalyptus, hard to beat that anywhere in the world. We don't get it much in Spain for some reason, but it was there this morning, and I really felt I was in my school uniform again, going to school after riding the Manly ferry across the harbour. That's how I used to go to school, to and from every day. That's where I read Jim Clark at the wheel on the Manly ferry. Wonder if Jimmy ever got a Manly ferry. I don't think he did. But I think he stayed in Rushcutters Bay Travel Lodge most of the time, I think, for Warwick Farm. Harry Moyes, part 1. Okay. There you go. Hi, Peter. Hope all's well. I'm starting to understand more and more why Daniel Ricciardo leaving Red Bull at the end of 2018 frustrates you. I used to appreciate the fact that he wanted to win at his own team as the number one driver. But when I look back at it, I just started to view it more as a career suicide. But my question is, he never left Red Bull. But my question is, if he never left Red Bull, do you think he and Max, as a teammate pairing, could have challenged Mercedes for the Constructors' Championship in 2020? Yeah, I do. And I think it was a massive mistake for him to leave. And I think they would have been a stronger team as a result of him staying. And he was definitely better still. And as he left, he was still better than Max in a couple of areas. I think arguably he was better in traffic and thinking a race through from lap 1 through to the checkered flag. He was very, very good. Maybe not as quick over one, well, for sure not as quick over one lap, but that wasn't a reason to leave. And if you think about Jonathan Wheatley, who was, I suppose his title was team manager, sporting director all that time at Red Bull, one of the key players in the pit lane at Red Bull, who's now at Sauber, starting to do a very good job at Sauber, getting rid of, the wheat and getting the chaff sorted and making sure it all operates as it should. In other words, a very good guy. I remember talking to him after Daniel left, and he said, look, he said, I went to Daniel. I said, Daniel, you are going to win a lot of Grand Prix if you stay with us. Do not make this mistake. And he just wouldn't listen. He was so, his ego was so hurt that Max was blowing him away as he saw it, that he just couldn't help himself. And there was more money on offer, obviously, at Renault. And so he took it. It was an ego thing for Daniel. And it's a great shame because you don't leave great race teams. You know, so many drivers never get the chance to race for teams as good as Red Bull. And he walked away from it. And you're absolutely right. You know, well, that's, I stand by that, and I'm happy to see that you're thinking the same way, because it was just a huge mistake. It's nothing to do with being number one driver. It was just being logical and understanding where Max was quicker, and obviously improving his own driving to match that, seeing what Max was doing with the car that he couldn't, and capitalizing on the things he was still doing better than Max anyway. And he never did that. Such a shame. Such a shame. And I think they would have had a better year for sure. Hi, Peter. Was K-Mag's short corner driver? Please talk more about his days with Rob. Thanks. He wasn't massively short. I would say he was Daniel Ricciardo-ish short. And I would say he was very similar to Daniel with his touch and feel. What impressed Rob about K-Mag was the rate of input being commensurate with the dynamic weight of the car, if you see what I mean. Everything was very harmonized, supple, SUPP inputs, and very, very sensitive on everything, which to Rob's mind, and I think he's correct, meant that Kevin had a lot more potential than some of the other drivers they were looking at. Because when you've got this lovely soft touch, you've then got the ability to start shortening the corners even more, and to doing other things as well, and warning the car and looking after the tires, doing all those things. And so that's what impressed him about Kevin Magnussen. But he wasn't that short when he was doing the days with Rob. And I don't think he ever did become that short. And I think in many ways, maybe that first couple of, that first great race he had with McLaren, maybe it was the worst thing that ever happened to him, because he, like a lot of drivers, I think he felt at that point, got this licked, done it, easy. Of course it wasn't, never would be. And he should have gone back to Rob and done a lot more work. And I don't think he did. So I think that was the issue. Alessandra Durango. Hi, Peter. Do you think Charles will leave Ferrari as soon as he gets any good offer from other teams? Not from any team, but if Toto Wolff rang Charles tomorrow and said, Charles, I know Ferrari might do a good car next year, but you may not know this, but George Russell's leaving. I'm just making this up. And regardless of how much it might cost you to get out of the contract, we will cover that. We want you to be number one driver with Kimi Antonelli at Mercedes. I think he'd say yes. And I think he'd do it. And I think he'd do the same with Red Bull. And I think he'd do the same with McLaren. But I don't think he'd do it for any other team apart from those. I think he would, if it was Racing Bulls or, I don't know, Haas, no way. But if it was Mercedes or Red Bull or McLaren, I think he would do it, yeah. Yeah, he would definitely do it under those circumstances, but that's not going to happen, is it? I can't see any team of those teams having any sort of opening for Charles in the next year or two. Unless, of course, Lando goes to Ferrari and Charles goes to McLaren. That could happen, I suppose. Maybe not a bad team, would it? Leclerc, Piastri. Imagine it was Lando Lewis at Ferrari. I say, making a slight face. For those who can't see this, probably a good thing. It wouldn't be the greatest of teams, would it? Sema Dragoon, just beautiful to watch. I think we're talking about, actually, that great car comments, I think, was to do with the Brabham BT6 Formula Junior now. Apologies in thinking it was the Toyota, although the Toyota is a great car, the Yaris, but the BT6 is an even better car, obviously. And yeah, everybody loved watching that video by the look of it. Max Flashart says, looks like the RB21 outside the operating window. Yeah, exactly right, except it's quick. There's a great quote from Gilles Villeneuve to Nigel Roebuck once. Gilles said, woe was the day when going sideways in Formula One was no longer quick. And there we are today. Going sideways isn't as quick as it should be. But look at that BT6. He's sideways going into scene and absolutely not losing any speed whatsoever. And doesn't he drive it well? Isn't Horatio a quick racing driver? I mean, I'm absolutely blown away. I have to, as much as I was a Paul Hawkins fan and a Frank Gardner fan who also raced that car for Ian Walker, I can't believe that he would have been driving that car quicker than Horatio drives it. I just don't think he could have. And when you think Paul Hawkins won at Rouen in that car in '63, imagine what that was like down the hill at Rouen through those fast sweepers down to the La Source hairpin. Sorry, Nouveau Monde hairpin. There you go. And then the very fast uphill run again. It was a great circuit, Rouen. Yeah, it was a lovely car. I mean, those Brabhams were like all Brabhams. They just handled well, big sweet spot. And for sure, Horatio is not doing that unless he's got a massive amount of field power sideways. He can get the thing. But you notice how he has understeer at some point. Then he just kills the understeer with oversteer. It's just great. He doesn't have a lot of power. It's just the car's on tiptoes because it's a lovely, light, delicate, beautifully balanced racing car. I say beautifully balanced, not in the sense that it was neutral, beautifully balanced in the sense that it was very easy with the big sort of pole you need, and when you're on the tightrope, it was very easy to keep the thing on the straight and narrow, even though it's going from side to side. Beautiful. Friction Circler says, Peter, Ross Brawn's regulatory hand saw the cars able to pass in 2022, but now we're back to the same issue that's confounded Formula One for the last 20 years. Unable to pass. What's changed? What design trick? Well, the reason they were kind of able to pass is that most of them had terrible porpoising and bouncing in 2022. And a car that didn't could easily overtake another. And the reason they're much more difficult now for passing is because in order to solve the problem of bouncing, they went to lots of vortex generators on the car, basically, to give it more aggressive downforce and get rid of the floating center of pressure. And that increased the drag, and therefore it's increased the outwash, and therefore they're more difficult to overtake. But they don't have much porpoising now. So the whole thing was based on a premise of, I've used that word twice now, but it's true. They have all these premises of what these cars are going to produce and why they're building them. And usually they fail. Or the premise is based on false data. In this case, it was a massive world fan survey that we've got to have more overtaking. And yet, had they just produced closer racing as distinct from more overtaking and not gone the route that they have with these ground effect cars, it would have been better for sure. More reliable. They'd gone back. They said, right, we're going back to V10s and the grids. We want the grid to be separated by no more than a second and a half, and they can all fight amongst themselves. Everyone would have loved it. But they didn't. Had to get a car that was easy to follow another car. Very complicated when you're trying to have a downforce car as well. As Peter Wright, who discovered the effectiveness of sliding skirts in the Imperial College wind tunnel in 1977, and then obviously brought them in 78, and then obviously in 70, and thereafter everybody copied them until they were banned, has always said the cheapest, easiest way to have overtaking in ground effect cars is to bring back sliding skirts. But Formula One will never do that because they think the skirts look a little bit old-fashioned and it's a step backwards in time, and maybe they damage the circuit a bit or whatever, or they don't want to see mechanics having to change skirts. It's a very old thing. So they never, so they don't open their minds, but for spurious reasons. And that's the problem. It's too much of a show. There's too many decisions made because of Wall Street. And the latest is, in my opinion, active error. We don't need active error. We don't care if the cars do 330 or 350 or 370 or 295. It's irrelevant. Providing the racing is good, the cars are reliable, and providing we have safety, that's great. But why go down the road of making things more dangerous by having something as outlandish as adjustable front and rear wings in parts of the circuit where it's not necessarily going to be a straight line? Spooky. Look at, and if you don't believe that, go and look what happened to Jack Doohan, who's no idiot. I can tell you now, Jack Doohan is a very, very good racing driver. And look at the shunt he had at Suzuka, purely because of DRS. Benzie News is Showdown. Peter, if all cars are pretty much the same speed order as last race, who do you foresee will be amongst the fastest in qualifying? Any chance of another Kimi appearance? I don't see Mercedes being slow Imola, that's for sure. I'd be interested to see how they go. I'm really interested to see how Kimi goes at Monaco. Really interested, because he is very good on slow corners. Very good short corner driver. I think he'll be all right at the top of Casino Square. I think he'll struggle a bit into the pool where it's super quick, but he'll be excellent around the Rascasse area. And that's probably where he'll have it over George, I would imagine, going into Rascasse, out of Rascasse. And don't forget how important that last sector is at Monaco in qualifying as well, with the tyres, getting the tyres to work in their last sector. So I think Kimi will be really good around Monaco. George will be very good through the pool to back, top of the hill, Casino Square. Ferrari, I don't know. We're just talking about Monaco at the moment, but I think Kimi now is confident. We know how good he is. Barcelona, he'll be good. Turn 9, he may be a little bit. No, turn 9's flat now anyway. I think the right-hander, the uphill right-hander. Where else would he? I think he'll struggle anywhere in Barcelona. He'll be very good around Barcelona. So Kimi, I think, could well be right there. And over one lap, Mercedes will probably be very near McLaren, I would imagine. It's such a shame that Max does these beautiful laps and then gets no reward for them on race day. Hensel says, brilliant speed sliding. This is talking about the BT6 and the ratio again, which is absolutely true. Tarak Ziad, hi Peter. Hello, Gotus Peter. How do you analyse different driving styles straight after a race? It's like you're at the track at all corners all the time. Well, it's just little glimpses here, little glimpses there, looking at comparisons between teammates, looking at photographs, looking at data, looking at lots of little things. It's quite often in life that you see something, you think, oh, that's interesting. It's a little thing. And you think, well, if that's been going on all the time? And you think, well, it doesn't really matter. It is happening now. And I saw that. And I saw that Kimi was doing that compared with George there. And let's look at the data and let's look at some photos. And it goes from there, really. I mean, racing, things happen very, very quickly. And the problem often is that we don't get to see the best angles of the cars and the drivers due to the director of the TV live feed wanting to show a pan shot or an overhead shot or whatever it is, and we don't get to see the great stuff. But sometimes we do, and you just got to be alert for those moments when you can actually look at what's happening. It's easier in the race to some extent because you get direct comparisons between the cars, but then don't forget in the race, guys like Verstappen are often not driving how they would drive if they were on their own. They're driving in defense or attack, and they're driving on sometimes where the grip is rather than how they just want to drive the car in a perfect world. So the race is sometimes misleading in terms of what you can do. It's more how they drive when they're on their own that you really need to pay attention to. Right, I'm going to do try and get through as many as I can, but I'm going to go through some other stuff now, which I think everyone might enjoy. I'll rush through it because then, because the video will be up from... I'll put the first one in. It will be up from when this ends, so you can look at these and freeze frame them. But these are more stats from my friend Paul Hobson, who I grew up with in Australia, really, and he's very good on this. He's very good at thinking things through with a long perspective. And what he's done is tried to compare the great drivers of the past with the current drivers, most successful drivers currently, taking into account the poor reliability of some eras of Formula One and the different point scoring systems we've had, and trying to do comparisons across the eras as a result. And there's only one proviso on these. What we need to remember is that with Fangio, he raced in an era when if your car retired, you could come into the pits and take over another team car, and that car could go on to win the race. So that needs to be borne in mind. That's why Fangio, well, it's not the only reason. I mean, Fangio is unbelievably good, or was unbelievably good, but that needs to be borne in mind. So anyway, I'm going to go through some stats that he's produced, which are really interesting. So it's a percentage of race wins from the number of race starts. So we see all these stats that come out of the most successful driver of all time might be Michael Schumacher, might be Lewis Hamilton, and it's all based on the number of races they started, obviously, because the more races you start, the more chance you have of winning. But if you average it out based on the number of starts you have and how many race wins you've had on those starts, look at the stats. Fangio, 47%. He won 47% of the races he started, but that includes, as I say, taking over a teammate's car if he's had a problem. Jim Clark, 34.7, but he didn't race in an era where you could jump into another car. He did that once in the non-championship 62 Mexican Grand Prix with Trevor Taylor, but it wasn't a championship race anyway. So Jimmy never scored a win by driving somebody else's car, whereas Fangio did. So Jim Clark, 34.7, not bad, eh? Max, third, ahead of Michael. That's just ahead of Michael. Isn't that interesting? Lewis, not far away. Senna, Prost. And then he's got Vettel, Alonso. Vettel, because he's recently retired. Alonso, and he's got the current drivers in, obviously, Alonso, Hamilton. There will be others that might have crept into other stats, but this is what he's done at the moment. This is from the number of races finished. And again, the stats are very impressive. Jim Clark, 52% of the races he finished, and he would have finished a lot fewer races than, say, Max Verstappen or or Lewis Hamilton or Michael Schumacher. But of the ones he did finish, 52% were wins. Fangio, 60%, again, taking into account that he did share other drivers' cars. Jim Clark, way ahead of Michael, Verstappen, Senna, Prost, Lewis, Vettel, and Alonso. Okay, let's go down to pole positions. Percentage of poles from the races entered. This is quite good because Fangio, in this case, you know, it's just one car, one lap. So Fangio, 56.9% of the races entered, he was on the pole. Jim Clark, 45% of the races he was on the pole. Ayrton Senna, who we know was a great pole driver, and that was one of his things, 40%. Look where Prost is, 16%. Prost was more into the race than qualifying. We'll see that coming up. Lewis, interesting, Lewis ahead of Michael and Verstappen there, I think, isn't it? 28.8. Michael 22, Verstappen 19. That's about right, isn't it? Because Max hasn't had that a great number of poles relative to how many great races he's had. Interesting. He's done some great pole laps, but often that speaks to how he's done pretty well in the races with not the fastest car. Vettel 19, not far away from Max, but then Vettel always had, when he was doing that, the Red Bull was a very, very good car. Alonso, again, you know, Alonso, he's in there because he's a current driver, but poor Fernando, it's not really a comparison for him. Fastest laps, the races finished. Now look where Prost is now, 24% of the races finished. Prost set fastest lap. Senna, only 14%. There's the difference between Prost and Senna, and most of that comes from the McLaren years. Clark, ahead of Fangio now. So not only was Clark very good on poles, but look at his fastest lap. Percentage of 58% of the races he finished, he set fastest race lap. And it wasn't in those days like going in and putting on a new set of tyres 3 laps from the end. These were tyres sometimes that had done 4 Grand Prix. In Jim Clark's case, he made the tyres last longer than any other driver. 58%, over 58% of the races he finished, Jim Clark set fastest lap. Michael Schumacher, 27, yeah, ahead of Prost, Hamilton, Verstappen, but long way behind Jim Clark and Fangio. Prost, yeah, pretty near there, right up in the mix now, because he was very, very good racing driver, Alan Prost. Lewis ahead of Max there, just interesting. Senna behind them both, Vettel, Alonso. Now, this is the percentage of laps led in races finished. In other words, you finished Jim Clark didn't finish anything like the same number of races percentage-wise as, say, Lewis Hamilton. But if we take that out of it and the races finished, how many laps, what percentage of that race was the driver in front leading? Clark, almost 50% of the races he finished, he led 50%. He led almost 50% of the laps in the races he finished. And that puts him at the top of the table, ahead of Fangio, even though Fangio had the assistance of driving another car. Senna, 36.3, Prost, 25. Interesting. So that means Senna, a lot of poles, probably led early on and then faded towards the end of the race with Prost coming on strong. Michael, 30.4. Impressive from Michael Schumacher there, I think. Verstappen, 30.1. Lewis, a little bit behind them. So that's a good one. Now, Grand Slams, pole position, leading every lap of the race, setting fastest lap. How many of the races finished, how many times did the drivers do that? What percentage? Jim Clark did that 16.7% of the time. Of the races finished, he was on a Grand Slam. again, different times, but showing how good I think he was in the way he managed his tyres in modern parlance. Everybody else in single figures. Jim Clark way ahead of everybody there in terms of domination in an era when it was very competitive. The Ferraris were quick. They won championships in Jim Clark's era. So did BRM. So did Brabham. Amazing. Average points per finish. If we're using the 9-6-4-3-2-1 point scoring system, interesting to see how many points was the average point scoring per finish if you take mechanical failures out of it. And don't forget, racing was a lot less reliable in the 50s and 60s. So Fangio, if you take the mechanical out of it, Fangio very, very good in terms of scoring points per race. 7 points. So just over 7 points per race was his average. Jim Clark, just over 5 points, or nearly 6 points per race. In other words, basically first or second in the case of Fangio and Clark. And then we get down to Prost, very good finishing record. This is with the 9-6-4-3-2-1 point scoring system. Then Max did very well. Look at Max right up there, ahead of Lewis, ahead of Senna, ahead of Michael. So that says a lot, I think. And then if you convert that to the 25 for a win point scoring system, which was something obviously we've never applied to Fangio or Jim Clark, look at the points there. There, Max Verstappen just edges ahead of Alain Prost. So Max Verstappen, very good if you apply it to excluding mechanical failures, number of average points per finish. Fangio still on top with Jim Clark. So what does all that mean? I think it means Juan Manuel Fangio and Jim Clark were pretty good, doesn't it? Jim Clark without an E as well. Liberty, take note. So I hope you enjoyed that. Thank you very much to my friend Paul Hobson. You can look at all those in freeze frame thing, and I'm sure a lot of people say, oh yeah, but did you do this? Did you do that? But I think Paul's pretty diligent. He might have made a small mistake somewhere, but probably only because some of the results are a bit hazy when you go back in time. So there we go. Friction circler, Tarek Ziad. He's omnipotent, didn't you know? So long since I've been on the track of this. I'm not quite sure what that refers to, but anyway, I'm sure it's well meant. LGH Jotma. Hello, Peter. Hope all's well. Apart from Alex Palou and the junior category drivers, who would you think could be a good Formula One driver? Speed, technical feedback that is not talked about enough. Fred Vesti, Théo Pourchaire, to name but two. I think, there are so many. There's so many, and it depends on the opportunity. I mean, I don't think Jack Doohan's spoken about enough, to be honest, or had the right opportunity, and that's another problem. And I don't know. We keep seeing these third drivers being given runs in FP1. It doesn't mean anything. You know, what they need is proper testing, and it all comes down to what I've said in other videos, other live streams. We need another B Division World Championship below this one, in which they run last year's Formula One cars with last year's Formula One engines, where possible. Obviously, when there's a change in regulation, then obviously you have to phase that through. And they go to circuits and they run on circuits in their own championship, which want to be on the Formula One calendar, but aren't, in countries that want to be in the championship, but aren't. Countries like a lot of the South American countries, South Africa, India, maybe another circuit in China, Vietnam, maybe New Zealand somewhere. You know, lots of countries where you could, they'd love to be in Formula One, but haven't yet. But it'd be a good way of having that second tier championship grow. And that's what we should be doing. And we'd have much better feedback on all of these guys. And I think Felipe Drugovich isn't spoken about enough. I think he's very good. I mean, I hate to think how rusty he is now through not having been able to race, but, you know, he's another one that's very, very good. Yeah, I think, you know, Vesti's a good example of a guy who, he's had a lot of coaching now from Mercedes in the right areas, technical and advisory and all that stuff. But he hasn't done enough racing, and he needs to be out there racing. He's racing now in Cadillac, I think, in IMSA, isn't he? Doing pretty well. I wonder if Cadillac might actually give him a race. Who knows? That would be good if they did. But he's a good example of a guy who's got the talent, for sure. He's definitely a short corner driver. That's why I keep going on about Vesti. But I also like Théo Pourchaire's sort of flair, French flair as a racing driver, just getting in the car and just getting on with it. And it's a shame we don't see him, because he'd be an enjoyable driver to watch. And then you've got people like Richard Verschoor. I mean, he's going to be around, for sure. Verschoor is going to be around, forever, isn't he? How many seasons has he done now? But he's quick. And I wish somebody would take notice of him and give him a proper drive somewhere in something. Give him a try anyway. He doesn't even get an opportunity, does he? What's wrong? The guy's really good. For sure, he's good. I don't know. There's so many young guys out there that I don't want to mention too many, because then the ones I don't mention don't get a chance. But in the past, I've always mentioned Ayrton Senna as a driver. I think had a lot of potential, still has. He's coaching now, doing a very good job with the teams, Formula 3, I think. But he shouldn't be doing that. He should be out there racing, certainly WEC. And so it goes on. Yeah, I've got plenty of young guys that I know who are racing in touring cars and British GT. Matt Cowley is another driver that I've had a lot of time for ever since he took the trouble to go to America and win the Formula Ford Championship in the States. Then he came back, no money at all, always trying to make it, doing British GT, doing well, waiting for the break to come. Hope it comes for him soon. Very talented driver. I think the Mainies are very good. Cush and Arjun, very good drivers. We're never going to see them in Formula One, I'm sure, but it goes on. It's annoying, actually. It frustrates me when I even go down that path to think of all these great drivers that we're never going to see. Westerly Storm 99. Hey, Peter from sunny Northern Ireland. How's my Irish accent? Terrible. I believe the Formula One YouTube channel's Ghost Drive at Miami shows exactly your comments between Max and Lando, and particularly Max's late braking skills. Yeah. Well, I haven't seen them, but Lando does tend to brake more in a straight line, and Max will try to extend the straight, and then he'll brake down to his rotation point. Completely different sort of braking scenario to Lando, and very difficult therefore just to say this is when Max brakes and this is when Lando brakes, because brakes for what? A rotation point or the geometrical apex that they're trying to hit? What is it? And that's why all that late braking stuff is, I think if we all just assume they're all really late brakers, we're okay, because they are. You're never going to, Liam Lawson's a late braker, but he's never really going to outbrake Yuki Tsunoda. I believe it. Yuki's just as late if he needs to be. And so that's not where the time is. And so it's logical that you would then think, and I hope Lando's thinking this way, I'm never going to outbrake Oscar Piastri. I've got to start learning how to brake into a rotation point rather than as I am. That's possibly an advantage I can get with Oscar. But I don't think he's doing that. And I'm surprised surprised with Lewis that the penny hasn't dropped, that he needs to go back to doing what he used to do there. If you look at him and the way he looked just like Carlos Sainz, didn't he? When he was driving in front of Carlos, we're doing the same thing. Wow, Doohan actually beat Gasly in 50% of their qualifying hot laps. Shame the record books only show results without context, like yellow flags. 6 races aren't enough to normalise the luck factor of Formula One. Very good point. I mean, I didn't know that stat, but thank you very much indeed, Justice, for pointing that out. And I've known Jack Doohan, watched Jack Doohan since Formula 4, and he is very good. There's no doubt this guy is potentially extremely good. But it's so difficult, isn't it? So annoying. I mean, the only thing I would say is that if you go to Alpine as a reserve driver and then you get your race drive, the chances are something's going to go wrong. It's a bit not flaky. They wouldn't like me saying that, but it is a bit flaky, that whole thing. I mean, if he'd been an adopted Merc or McLaren driver from day one with a real chance of getting into a Formula One car, I think he'd be more confident and a better driver than he is now. But he's done well, considering how difficult it is at Alpine. I think he's done really well. I just hope he gets another chance. I really do. I really rate him. Friction Circular, loving the irony. Anyway, it's just chatting amongst themselves. Arnab Das, so surprised a driver like Dan Gurney never won the World Championship. Yeah. When you think that Denny Hulme won it in 67 in the Brabham, nothing against Denny, but he wasn't any better than Dan Gurney, that's for sure. And Dan never really had the chance, even though he did drive for Brabham and he won Brabham's first Grand Prix in French Grand Prix, 64. And then he won in Mexico the same year. And he was very good. He won Porsche's one and only Grand Prix, Rouen 62. And then, of course, he won not only the Belgian Grand Prix in 67 with his own Eagle Westlake, but he also won the Race of Champions that year. So he was right on it. Whether he would have, if he'd stayed in Formula One, whether he would have gone on to win the World Championship in an Eagle, let's think about it. The Cosworth engine came in in 67 and came on strong in 68. I think Dan with the Eagle Westlake would have been struggling with the weight and the fuel, the V12 engine, as beautiful as it was. And so that would have been a struggle. But he did come back and he drove McLaren Cosworths and did a very good job just as a stand-in driver, particularly when Bruce sadly lost his life. Dan was very good. He was the rival that Jim Clark feared the most. And they were good friends as well. It was Dan who introduced Jim Clark to the concept of going to Indianapolis back in 1960, back end of 61, going into 62. And then Colin loved the idea as well. And they took a Lotus 25 Formula One car from the US Grand Prix straight to Indianapolis. And Jimmy did a few laps in the Formula One car with Dan there and said, yeah, this is going to work. And then the whole Lotus to Indy program was born. And that's why Dan drove the second factory Lotus in 63 at Indy. Yeah, he was great. And the reason he stopped Formula One was because a lot of his backing at that time was coming from Goodyear. And Goodyear, having won the Belgian Grand Prix in 67, they wanted Dan to go back and be really big, even bigger in Indy, and to win the Indy 500. And so he went back and focused on that. And he did win the Indy 500 with Bobby Unser, and he finished second himself as a driver. And of course, he won lots of NASCAR races, particularly at Riverside, 5 NASCAR races at Riverside, I think. And he won Le Mans in 67 with Ford, did a lot of the development work with Shelby on the Ford GT, particularly the Mark IV, but also the Mark II as well. Just a great, all-round great driver, great person. Then later life, all the stuff he did with the Toyota, the Eagle factory and the 5000 car. Yeah, didn't win the World Championship, but that's more to the loss of Formula One than Dan. I think he was just a great driver who was able to drive anything, anywhere, great engineering brain, and one of the nicest, coolest people you could ever meet. One of the last time I was with Dan, actually, we went down. I was at his place in near Newport, and we went down to this restaurant, the marina there. And imagine how nice it was. And it was the restaurant that John Wayne used to go to, and there was Dan, and the whole place sort of lit up when Dan walked in. Just wonderful. Ciencia e filosofia. Wow. Message retracted. Oh, there you go. Oh, here's another message now. I have to go back up to the top to read it now. Sorry about that. I haven't got all that. So many questions. I'm not going to be able to get through them, I'm afraid. Because it's already 1:30, 11:30, 12:30, 1:30. Should be going to be stopping soon, aren't I? What's going on? I'll do a little bit more. There's so many questions. I'm overwhelmed, actually, how many questions there are. Anyway, from Ciencia e Filosofia, Dr. Ramon. Hi, Peter. What is the likelihood Verstappen will leave to Mercedes for 26? Aston Martin's been mentioned, but why would he move there? Dead last at present. Well, he'd move there because they won't be dead last in 26. They're going to have Adrian Newey's car there. Adrian left Red Bull, who was the architect of a lot of Max's success at Red Bull, virtually all of his success, actually, is out now at Aston Martin, who are spending a fortune and have great facilities. So the odds are they're going to have a very good car in 26. So that would be more attractive to Max, I would have thought, than Aston Martin. Than Mercedes, rather. And Mercedes will be good, for sure. They'll have a good power unit. But I just think he'd be more at home at Aston because of the Adrian factor. Having said that, I'm of the opinion that it would be pointless him leaving Red Bull until he knows what the Red Bull Ford is going to be like for 26. Because that may be a very good car. I mean, it's unlikely Red Bull are going to produce a bad car in 26. Why would they? Or Ford, indeed, would produce a bad car with Phil Prue running that whole power unit operation there. Couldn't have a better guy. But having said that, he may well go to Aston. Who knows? I don't think it'll be money. I think it'll be more that he just thinks he's got more chance of having the right car if he goes there than if he stays where he is. He'd probably think that. But it would be annoying if he went there and the Red Bull was really quick, wouldn't it? Because nobody knows what the 26 cars are going to be like yet. Nobody knows. The regulations aren't even finalised yet, even though it's May. And so we're all ready to be surprised. Friction Circular. Nice guys finish last. Yeah, that's true. Friction circular again. On that point, looking forward to two tough nuts in Piastri and Verstappen going at it later this year. I think Verstappen is the tougher in the end. Will Red Bull give him what he needs? Well, we're all waiting with bated breath as to how teams like Red Bull, Mercedes, and Ferrari will respond to the tighter front wing, flexi wing regulations we're going to have at the Spanish Grand Prix, and whether that evens things out and all of a sudden McLaren no longer have an advantage. They still have a quick car, but they don't have this huge advantage. And if that is the case, if McLaren no longer have a huge advantage and they're basically on parity with Ferrari, Red Bull and Mercedes, then yeah, you know, Piastri versus Verstappen, stand back. Having said that, I think McLaren probably will still have an advantage after Spain over the rest of the year, and therefore Max will have his moments and he'll be alongside Piastri, you can be sure, into certain first corners at any given racetrack. But over a race distance, the McLaren is still going to be the better car, probably. Sadly, you could almost say for the sake of Formula One. For the sake of Formula One, let's hope that there's a great race between Piastri and Lando Norris. But for that to happen, Lando needs to get some confidence, needs to get some momentum going again, and needs to, you know, think a bit more clearly when he's in situations as he is turn one in Miami, when the clear logical thing would have been just to back away slightly, give Max the lead, and then pass him DRS 2 laps later. Easy for me to say that, but, you know, that's probably what Piastri would have done, I think, in that situation. Kurt Pickering. Watching Horatio, you can see how John Surtees made the jump from Grand Prix bikes to cars, steering with the rear wheels at speed. Yeah, good point. I mean, there's so many ways you could steer a non-aero car. 63 car on narrow tyres. Look at that. How he was able to get rid of understeer. The oversteer didn't slow him down. Everything, and even under braking, the thing's moving all over the place. But it's not an issue. It's just like, okay, yeah, moving around a bit, fine. 4-speed gearbox too, and the things look so quick and so energized. Just an energized lap. That's why I wanted to show it to you. It just makes you feel alive watching that lap, I think. And doesn't he drive well? Benzie News Showdown. Just lots of nice memes. Is that right? Right word? Or is the meme the thing that Donald Trump's just made $17 trillion with? I don't know. One of the two. LGH Jotma. Dr. Romeo Mercedes means competing against Antonelli, who's their boy. Also, we don't know if they will drop Russell. Aston, not really Aston, has a serious infrastructure. Yeah, I mean, Aston's Honda, isn't it? You know, whether Max would enjoy working for the Strolls is another matter. But Max is so good at sort of building his own cocoon and just going racing that he'll be all right, probably in that area. Yeah, Mercedes alongside Antonelli. I don't think Max would be that worried about it. But yeah, I mean, if it was, as you say, Mercedes would have to get rid of George Russell and for that to happen. And if Max said, they said to Max, oh, your teammate's Antonelli, I don't think he'd say, oh, no, I'm not going to have him. I think he'd say, yeah, okay, good. He'd be fine with Antonelli, I think. Yeah, he'd be fine with that. Not because he thinks he could blow him away, but just I think he thinks he's probably quite a intelligent young kid and drives well and no problem. Isn't that what you think? So, yeah, I'm just going to some other questions now. One of my buddies is saying, Peter, you spend far too long between questions going through all this stuff. But my response is there's no other way of doing it with this other than with this chat. And because I want to bring them up on screen, so everybody has their name on screen, and sometimes it freezes, so not much I can do. Mansell says, Friction Circular, an extraordinarily sensitive man who overcame the same with his strong will and harnessed the same sensitivity to apply those ultrafine inputs that elevate him above others? Question mark. Yeah, agree with all of that. And I think a lot of people who used to run him down, namely the British press, a lot of the British press, would never have described him as an extraordinarily sensitive man. I think they saw him as a very brutal, not brutal, very ham-fisted, strong person who lacked Senna's and Prost's sensitivity. That's how they would see it. And I think they were wrong. I still think they're wrong now, because Nigel is a sensitive guy with his touch and with his feel. And as I said before, you know, he's, as long as he is off the tee, Nigel's at his best around the green with the touch shots. And it's the same with his driving. He was always good in the wet. I mean, think about this, 92 Belgian Grand Prix, Yep, Nigel's in the active 14B and Senna's in the passive McLaren. But there's a bit of a neutralizer because it's raining and it's wet and they're on slicks. And Nigel passes Ayrton on the outside of Blanchimont on lap 2. Now, there's no way active ride was helping him very much there. That was all about feel, I can do this, and it's only Ayrton Senna, pass him on the outside. That shows how good Nigel was. And it wasn't, and I say that not just from the point of view of the pace in the car, but also that he had no compunction about passing Ayrton Senna on the outside. Not many drivers would have had the confidence to do that, even if they had the car. But for Nigel, bang, no problem. I thought that was one of the best passes Nigel made, actually. That and Berger in Mexico in 1990, when he was in the Ferrari, passed him on the outside of the Piratella. Witty Goose 9341. Have you watched the Netflix documentary The Seat? Came out a few days ago about the switch to Kimi replacing Hamilton at Mercedes. He's such a nice lad. No, I haven't seen it. He seems to be a good, nice, humble person, doesn't he? But I haven't seen it, no. Farmer. Crofty out, Alex Brundle in. Quite sure what all that means. Probably talking about Sky commentary. No idea. I never watched Sky, so I can't even talk about it. Sorry. Kurt Pickering. Do you think former Australian world champion Alan Jones's mentally weak comments about Lando will help or hinder Piastri? About Alan Jones saying that Lando was weak mentally? I think it's probably what you're saying there. I don't know what Alan said, but I'm assuming that's what he said. Because compared with Alan Jones, he is weak. Alan Jones is one of the strongest drivers physically and mentally I've ever known. Top man. Will help or hinder Piastri? I don't think Piastri reads the press or gets involved with anything, does he? He just lives his own life and very quiet and calm, just looks forward to the next race, talks to his engineers about rowing and the Olympics and all good things and Mark Webber and gets on with it. I don't think he would read any of that. And he knows how to race Lando Norris. He knows that there will come a time when maybe he's got to help Lando a bit to help Zach get Lando up again, maybe. As I said to Cameron, I think Oscar's had a sufficiently good run now that if he's leading at Imola and they're way ahead, but Lando's maybe a little bit quicker and he's behind him on maybe newer tyres or something, I think they might say to Oscar, it's good for the team now if Lando wins this one. I think Oscar might do it. I think he would say, okay, I've had a good run. He's that sort of bloke. He's really good. I think he'll do it for the benefit of the team. I don't think he would just say, no, I'm going to do it for Oscar Piastri. He's not that sort of guy. He's a really good bloke. I mean, Tom Stallard, his engineer, he's got a very good relationship with him too. And he knows all about, that's why I talk about rowing in the Olympics, because he knows all about athleticism and how to handle other athletes as well. And that's a great combination they've got there, no doubt. Right, Benzie News' showdown. We're getting on to Alpine now. As if I know what's going on there. I mean, obviously I've had a few emails from the key players. I say obviously I have had, lucky to have had, and don't give too much away. But what's happening at Alpine? Ollie's brother, co-director at High Tech, was in this story. Oakes resigned Alpine team principal after his brother was arrested in a raid. Yeah, transferring criminal property. As I said before, since when was that a crime in Formula One? Oh, shouldn't be saying that. Yeah, I mean, it's not a great thing, obviously, from Ollie's point of view. And so it looks like he's kind of had to very quickly resign. And it was timed, the timing was just after the whole Jack Doohan thing. And so a lot of people thought it was in sympathy with that. But I don't think it was. I think it was more this happened and he needs to get back and keep High Tech on the straight and narrow, running Formula 3 and Formula 2 and probably some other stuff as well that we don't know about, and look after that. And that's where he's gone. I don't think there was any falling out between Ollie and Flavio or Alpine even. Dmitry Shimanev. Hey from Russia. Hi there. I'm the organizer of the largest indoor karting championship in Russia by geography. There'll be 16 tracks next season. Do you think Formula E will overtake Formula One in speed? I don't think Formula One... Well, actually, it's a good point, isn't it? Because I keep going on about who cares about top speed in Formula One. I hadn't thought about that. Maybe Formula E cars will be quicker than Formula One, and that's why they're having to do it. Unlikely, but possible, I suppose. I don't know how quick Formula E cars are in Australia. I don't think they go to circuits where it's that quick, do they? I don't know. I've no idea. Somebody can probably tell me. Do they do 330 kilometers an hour in a Formula E car? No idea. Narrow tires, maybe. 16 indoor karting championships. Wow, that's good. Well, good luck with that. And look forward to seeing lots of young drivers coming through your system there. Sounds good. Friction Circular says, on a curious note, will Alonso have one last hurrah? He deserves in what must be his last year in Formula One 26. I fear we'll be talking about him as a two-time world champion who had more in him. Well, yeah, he's definitely had more in him. He hasn't had a very good run of cars since Ferrari, really. So, yeah, I mean, I think a little bit like Daniel, he should never have left McLaren when he did. And he could have stayed had he approached things differently. And I think he could have stayed at Ferrari had he approached things differently. And he could have won more races and possibly championships with both those teams. So we shouldn't feel that sorry for him because they were decisions he effectively made. He says he would say he was forced out in both occasions, but in reality it was the situation that he had created because of who he is and how he drives and how quick he is that obliged him to leave, if you like. And so that's why he's in that situation. And his only chance is if he is now in the Adrian Newey car in 26, which is a possibility, and I'm sure he's working hard to try and persuade Lawrence to let him do that. The problem is, presumably Lawrence is going to want to see his son Lance in an Adrian Newey car and winning Grand Prix in his mind. So there's one car out the way. And the other car, if you've got a Max Verstappen ringing up Lawrence Stroll saying, how about we have lunch or dinner or coffee, Lawrence Stroll's going to rush there and meet Max Verstappen, isn't he? So that's Fernando's issue there. And if he doesn't keep the Aston Martin drive, I can't imagine he's going to be in a competitive car anywhere else next year. D. Jordan. Hey all, does anyone know why the 2025 FIA driving standards guidelines are so secretive? I don't know. I didn't know they were. I never read them anyway because I think they're all nonsense. But if they're secretive, it would only be one of these Formula One things of, I mean, why are the updates to the technical regulations and the sporting regulations so secretive as well for the media and the public? No explanation for that either. I think Formula One people in general, motor racing people, love secrets, don't they? All started with Michael Schumacher. The more secrets we have, the better for us. Nobody must know anything. And lead them down the wrong path. Or just say nothing. That was Michael's thing. The less they know, the bigger advantage for us. And I think everybody just feels the same way now. You got Zach talking about water on the tyres. That's the big key to the McLaren thing. They're watering the tyres or doing something with the tyres. Like Carlos Reutemann in the 81 British Grand Prix. To show his annoyance that he's having to go back to Goodyear's from the Michelins he'd been racing on that year. They switched tyres mid-season. Bernie got Goodyear back into racing again and elbowed, strong-armed Frank into going back to Goodyear from Michelin, strongly against Carlos's desires and wishes and recommendations, with no contract either. Just Frank thought he'd better do it because Bernie asked him to. And the first race was the British Grand Prix. The Goodyears were just going off like crazy. So Carlos, every time he got out of the car, he'd pick up a watering can and pour the water all over the tyres on the car. All the press taking pictures. That's why Carlos said to Frank before the Canadian Grand Prix, the wet Canadian Grand Prix in 81 that year, we should run on Michelins tomorrow. I won at Rio on 81 in the wets. They'll be good. The Goodyears will be terrible. And they were. And Frank didn't switch to Michelins. No contract. They could have done it. LGH Jotima, do you have an opinion on what could be improved in showing the races? Should they look at more cockpit views or something from the outside with more detail like drones flying along? Well, they have a very good overhead drone shot now, which is the drone stationary over the cars as they're going into a corner. I wish they'd show that for longer and you could do really nice traces of the lines that they're taking into the corner there. That's something they could do on a regular basis. So thanks for mentioning that to remind me of that. Point one. Point two, footwell cameras. 26 regulations have not been finalized. There's still time to have chassis big enough to have decent lighting in the front of the footwell area, to have proper cameras for the footwell area. That won't happen even, I can tell you now, because they'll want to get the car as slim and as light as possible in that area. But I'm going to mention it anyway because I wish we had it. And What else? I think the only view on board that works for me is when you're on the side, either side of the driver's helmet, and you can see his hands, you can see the track in front, and you can position the car. The low down shot does nothing for me. You can't even see what part of track it's on, where it is relative to the curbs or whatever. And that's just there just to show it's fast, because that's how Hollywood like to show it. And I suppose the flexi wing thing, angles are okay if you really want to look at flexi wings, but it's all a bit boring, all that. I find it anyway. I'd much rather have proper views of the cars, going into corners and not panning so much, not following cars, but keeping the camera stationary just to see the difference between the cars. I'd love to see more of that. But more than anything, I'd love to see the debriefs being filmed. I'd like to see the driver's briefing being filmed. I'd like to see GoPros in the road cars as they're going to and from the tracks and picking up the conversation of what they're talking about and all that stuff behind the scenes. That's what the Netflix Drive to Survive should be. It should be real stuff like that, rather than all the, not that I've ever seen it, but I'm imagining and I hear that it's all quite contrived. So that's how I would improve it. As I've always said, there's so many stories to be told, real stories in Formula One behind the scenes, which are not being told. And all the teams need to be told to do is sign the Concord Agreement around that new access. And some of them would kick and squeal, but pay them a little bit more money, they'll be fine. So I think Friction Circular's answering D. Jordan here about the secrecy of the drivers' things. If you don't know the rules, you can't question them and show them in a public light. Well, there you go. Probably absolutely the reason. Electrica A. Hi, Peter. I've learned so much from your podcast. Thank you very much. Well, thank you. That's very kind. Glad you have. And I learned from you guys as well. All the questions you raise. I'm thinking, wow, that's an interesting question. I think I've missed one. Here we go. Benzie News Showdown. Aston Martin. Peter, can you see Papa Stroll sell the team if the team can get Max? Can I see Lawrence Stroll selling the team if the team can get Max or can't get Max? I'm slightly confused there. I can see him wanting to sell the team if his son isn't driving there anymore. I can see that, because I don't see why he's in it other than to enable Lance to become world champion. Isn't that where he's done the whole thing? He may say now, I'm really enjoying this now, and I just want to be there anyway with Max. But it's a big thing for him to say, I've given up on my son after all that he's done, all the money he spent on him. Ishan Malak. Lando was annoyed with Max's defence post-race as it ruined his chances. Do you think Lando should just be better at reading Max and making a decisive move? Yeah, absolutely. As I've said, he should have... It was obvious that's what Max was going to do, as you correctly say. He should have read that. And B... regardless, the move there was to come out of the throttle slightly, give the position to Max going into the left-hander, and then pass him 3 laps later in DRS. And it's silly for Lando, I think, to be annoyed with Max there, because what does that achieve? It just shows that he got it wrong, really. He misjudged it, particularly as there was no penalty. So end of story. It should have been. I mean, Kimi, as I say, handled that situation much better in the sprint race. When they said to him, no penalty, and he said, oh, that's good to know. That's all Lando needed to say. K-Bands. Peter, good morning. Hi. Did you notice the trend of 4 to 5 top teams in Miami being Mercedes powered? Also, does Sainz's Williams selection look good in hindsight? He also lost 2 tenths and still put in P9. Yeah, I'm getting kind of used to Mercedes being there. They're with good teams. It's a good engine. I don't think any of the teams that are not in the top 4 or 5 are lower down because of their power units. I think it's more the chassis and the way they're running the car and the team. We used to say the Renault engine was, not very powerful, but I think it's not too bad now. And sorry about that. Excuse me. My eye, and a bit hay fever still, itchy eyes. And so I think they're just with good teams, aren't they? They're doing well with the Mercedes engine. That's what it's all about. And I think the big question is, did I notice how the customer team yet again blew away the factory Mercedes team? I think that's the key point, isn't it? And then we're talking about Williams and Sainz. Was it a good selection in hindsight? Personally, I still think no, because I think had he gone to Sauber, he would end up in 26 being number one driver at Audi with Nico Hülkenberg alongside him, with Jonathan Wheatley running the team very well. And I think the car will be all right, but I think long term for Carlos, it's much better for him to be with Audi down the road, with Jonathan Wheatley kicking things along in a very aggressive way to the point where they probably will do quite well, rather than to be at Williams where, on a really good day, he's going to beat Alex Albon. On a bad day, he's going to be a little bit behind him. He's going to be top 10, score the odd point. But to what avail? In terms of where he's going in his career, where does that take Carlos Sainz? I don't think he's going to get a drive at Mercedes. I don't think he's going to get a drive at McLaren again. I don't think he's going to go to Red Bull again. And he may go back to Ferrari. That's the only real option. But if he's not going to go back to Ferrari, he might as well be number one at Audi than to be a sort of journeyman driver in a Williams. That's why. I mean, there's no doubt, and everybody knew the Williams would be a better car this year than the Sauber is. Having said that, Bortoleto and Nico have had their moments already, haven't they? They're looking a little bit better than Sauber ever looked last year, with Jonathan Wheatley running the team now. And Wheatley's that good. So I think in retrospect, he still made the wrong decision, is my opinion. Anyway, we've actually come to a point where the chat box has managed to blow up again, and I'm at well past 2 hours here. So I'm going to have to say adieu at this point because I've got other things I need to get on with. I know I'm very conscious that there are a lot of people that I didn't get to talk to and receive questions from. And my apologies to you because it's not good, but I'll try and do another live stream before Imola, that's for sure. And I'll try and do some other interesting stuff as well for the next one. But thank you very much again for being a part of this. Without you, we wouldn't have a show, as I say. So it's a brilliant thing that we can do this. And big thanks to my partners, to TrackNinja, to Jetcraft, to OEM Exclusive, and to REC Watches for their support, without whom, again, we wouldn't be able to have shows like this. So thanks for watching, and we'll be back again very soon. Take care.